Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my fifth and final primer video of the 2024 off-season or preseason here. The final one here going to be for the LPL. I'm very excited. This is going to be one of the longer videos I put out all year long because we have to talk in depth about all 17 LPL teams, but I hope you guys are strapped in. I hope you are excited. I know I am. If you are excited, if you are interested in this kind of content, let me know down in the comments section below. Let me know what you think of a lot of the rankings that I'm giving out today. Obviously, we'll go over the format in just a second for those of you who aren't familiar with it, but up in the iCard right now, you're going to see a playlist of videos that not only is, the primers that we've released, but I'll also be linking the off-season video for the LPL up in that iCard as well. And so it's going to be a lot of the content that I've made over the course of this off-season, one of them talking about everything that you can expect from the LPL in terms of, whether or not these orgs are moving in the right direction. This obviously being a lot more spring split focused rather than big picture like that video was, but also all the other primers that we've done for the 3 other major regions as well as the NACL. Are all going to be linked up in that iCard as well, so check those out. But I'm very excited today to get into the LPL. Obviously, this is one of my favorite leagues to watch. It's one of the most action-packed, one of the most volatile leagues in the world to watch, and talent-wise, it might just be the best in the world right now in terms of what we can expect going into 2024. The top of the LCK is very good, but I think you could even make the argument that the top of the LPL is better. It's certainly going to be fun, but without further ado, let's jump right into it. A couple bits of housekeeping at the beginning, as I always have to do in these videos. It's always important to, I guess, explain the format, explain the premise of the video first and foremost so that you guys aren't too confused or that I want to make sure my points are getting across correctly. This is a primer and a power rankings video, which means that this is for every type of fan. If you're new to the LPL, perhaps you've seen, what they've been able to do internationally at a lot of these events. You've seen how fun these teams are, and you finally want to start tuning in or keeping up with the LPL, then this video is for you. I'm going to be going over all 17 teams, their expectations, every single player on those teams, so you can have an idea of maybe what to expect out of all of them, what the preconceived notions, I guess, of them are. But this is also going to be for veterans of the LPL, people who have been watching and people who have been following for a while, because I am going to be power ranking all of these teams from 17 to 1 and giving my own opinions on all of them. And that's another big point in these videos is, at the end of the day, this is just my opinion. There is something on this list that you are going to disagree with. That is just 100% true. There's no way that our opinions match up 100%, but that's okay. That's the whole point of it being an opinion. I have some out there takes that people aren't exactly as fond of as maybe some other opinions, and so there probably are going to be multiple things in this video that you end up disagreeing with, but I do have to preface it, it is just my opinion, and this scale is very flexible. I'll talk about it even more so than some of the other major regions that we've covered. Obviously there are so many players that you really have to separate them into tiers more than, just numbers, right? 1 to 10 or 1 to 8 in the LCS's case is a little bit easier to discern because some players are just clearly better than others, whereas in the LPL, a lot of players are of similar skill levels, and trying to discern between them, in terms of, who's number 6 and then 7 and then 8, like, that's very flexible. A lot of those players are going to end up switching around, especially in positions like mid lane that are very stacked at the LPL level. So don't take the numbers too seriously. Obviously, these are what I believe to be the rankings, but, if you want a player even like 5 spots up or 5 spots down, if I have a player at 10 and you want them at 5 or you want them at 15, I'm not even really going to argue you all that much. I mean, it's a pretty big gap in terms of, where my opinion would lie and where I would, be uncomfortable placing them and where I would be willing to argue it. And so, it's pretty flexible in that regard. And also, I want to make note, these rankings have changed drastically since Demacia Cup. Obviously, I recorded my offseason video before Demacia Cup ended up, happening. I didn't get to see any of those teams play, but now that we've seen them play, I have essentially adjusted, power rankings 0.5, if you will, and that will affect, some of the graphics that you've seen in the past couple of videos. It's a little bit different here in the LPL because of that, but these are my updated power rankings after Demacia Cup, and Demacia Cup absolutely did change my power rankings, even more than it has in previous years, in my opinion. So That's basically it. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Of course, housekeeping, I appreciate you guys sitting through it. It just has to be done. If I don't make those, statements at the beginning, then, I gotta explain what the format is. But now we get to jump into the video itself. If you are new here, what we do is go from number 17 to number 1 in my personal LPL power rankings, going over everything that you need to know about the team, what trajectory they might be heading. All 5 players, I will be ranking all 5 of them in their positions from 1 to 17 as well. And then, I'll be talking about potential upside, potential floor, and, giving you an idea of maybe what the team itself is expecting going into the season. And that means we get to start it off with our number 17, our last ranked team in the LPL. I will also be separating these teams into tiers. It's going to be F, D, C, B, A, and S. A lot of tiers, but it's a lot of teams, and I really do think that there are noticeable differences between the tiers, so I want to make sure that I make those points clear. And again, the tiers are there because if you want to move a team up or down in a tier, that's not an argument for me. If I have a team at the bottom of B tier that you think should be at the top of B tier, absolutely, go and do it. I want it to be known that means if 2 teams are in the same tier, I see them as interchangeable to an extent, or at least, realistically interchangeable across this list. And that means we get to kick it off with our F tier. And coming in at number 17 for me, it is going to be Ultra Prime. Somebody has to come in last, and for me, Ultra Prime is pretty clearly the worst roster in the LPL. Their Demacia Cup run was not good. They were only able to beat basically an Academy Camp team, and that's never a good sign. And I really just don't think there's a lot of optimism surrounding what Ultra Prime is doing right now. This roster doesn't really have a ton of upside. They don't really have a high floor. I don't really know what the direction is for what they're going in, but we're here anyways. But we'll quickly explain what the format you're seeing on the screen is. If you are new here, what you're seeing is the team. Obviously, at the top, you're seeing their placements from last year in the spring split and in the summer split, whether or not they qualified for the season finals, which of course Ultra Prime did not. They were really bad last year, 16th in terms of championship points. And then the trending tab usually would show how they, ended last year in comparison to this year. So, for a team like Ultra Prime, they finished in 16th place in the, in the LPL last year due to championship points. And so them going to 17th would typically be a down, and it would be a -1, but I've changed it up in this LPL video to reflect my power rankings before Demacia Cup, because I think that that's more fair. My off-season, pre-anything power rankings, they were also 17th in those. It's not really a big change here. Some of these teams are going to change a lot. One team in particular really shot up the rankings here for me, but Ultra Prime has always kind of been considered the 17th team for me, so they have stayed technically from my pre-Demacia Cup power rankings to now. But obviously, you see all 5 players on the team as well. Numbers are below them. That is where I rank them personally in their position. I do have to add the caveat that some positions are just better than others. At the bottom, usually it's relatively fine. At the top, it's usually relatively fine. But the middle of some positions are a lot more stacked than others. Being, the 10th or 9th ranked mid laner is much better than being 10th or 9th in basically any other position in the LPL, because there's just more good mid laners. That means that not every player who has the same number next to their name is of equal skill. I mean, players like Decade, Uakai, and Doggo, for example, in this, example, slide here, or even Hacker and Jue, like, they're not of the same skill level just because they're the same number. It's obviously all contextual based on the rest of their position. And so, obviously, that probably goes without saying, but I do have to add that caveat because people do ask about it in the comments. Of course, if you also see an asterisk next to any player's name, that just denotes that they are an import and that they take up an import slot. But for Ultra Prime in particular, their lineup is now looking like Decade in the top lane, Hacker in the jungle, Uakai in the mid lane, Doggo at AD carry, and Jue at support. This team just isn't very good. Like, there really isn't a lot of upside here. I think a lot of veterans on this team that you kind of know what you're getting out of them. And, even in the upside players, which I do think you have, 2 upside players and maybe 2.5, depending on just what happens here. I don't think their upside is, like, ridiculous. I certainly don't think they're potential stars. And this team just feels like it's trapped in a purgatory. It feels like they've gotten worse every single year that they've existed ever since becoming Ultra Prime from E-Star. And I don't really know if this is the team that's going to get them out of this. I would be really surprised if this team was more competitive, which is why I feel very confident in putting them at number 17. But let's go through the individual players. Only one player is returning on Ultra Prime from last year. That, of course, being Doggo in the bot lane. He was better, I think, than people gave him credit for last year. I mean, Ultra Prime was a disaster, but they got better in the summer split. There were ways that they could win the game. You know, Harry was a little bit, of a power point in the top side and allowed Doggo, I think, to play a little bit without as many restrictions in the bot lane, because the problem that Doggo was facing in the spring split when he was playing a lot worse is that he was consistently getting 3v2'd by jungle because the rest of this team was just not winning. Mid lane was a complete black hole for this team, and jungle was just the most volatile role in the entire league, and so you could really invest a lot of resources into trying to shut Doggo down, and there was really not a lot that he could do. He's still going to take a pretty big dip in my rankings because of it, going all the way down to number 16, but at the end of the day, I think Doggo is somebody that could theoretically be a solid LPL starter in the AD carry role. You know, we've seen it in the past. He was brought into Bilibili because he was such a star in the PCS. There still is potential, I think, for him to actually do something. I just feel really bad because it's not going to be on this team. This team is just not good enough. He's kind of the 0.5 that I was talking about earlier. There are some interesting prospects, and Doggo, I guess, technically is one of those. I just wouldn't imagine that this is the team that ends up bringing him back to prominence, but everybody else on this team is new. They're bringing him in here this offseason. We'll start with, some of the veterans, the biggest veteran obviously being Hacker. He is returning to Ultra Prime, not from last year, but obviously he started his career on E-Star, played for Ultra Prime, ended up going to FPX last year, and, he is the prime example of a player that is generically below average. Like, he doesn't really do anything at a particularly average level, but he's also not tremendously awful at any stage of the game that you're just gonna freak out about him being a starter. He's gonna be one of the weakest starters in the league, and honestly, he shouldn't probably be a starter. There are so many good jungle prospects in the LDL, in the LPL, just as substitutes right now that, I'm shocked that Hacker still has a starting job in the league, but you're going to have junglers that perform worse than Hacker. That just kind of is what it is. He's going to have good games every once in a while, and maybe getting back into an organization that obviously he likes playing for, having come back here, after spending a very short amount of time out of the organization, maybe that, increases his output and his productivity. I just wouldn't expect it. Hacker has been one of the worst junglers in the league for 3 years or so now, and I wouldn't really expect anything to change there. You've got Decade coming into the top lane. It's kind of just been a backup, kind of been a rotational top lane piece. Played a bit for LGD last year, was, swapped in and out for Fearness in the top lane, and he was the worst of those two in the top lane, and so I really wouldn't expect him to be an impact player. The only reason he's coming in anywhere higher than number 17 is because there is a top laner who has never played professionally outside of Demacia Cup, in the LPL, and I just can't justify putting that player above anybody who has LPL experience, who has shown that they're able to survive at that level, but Decade functionally will be the worst top laner in the league, because I doubt that number 17 player will stay there the entirety of the split. Decade is just not a starting caliber top laner, or at least he hasn't shown that he can be. Maybe he has upside, maybe he's one of these upside pieces. I just really wouldn't anticipate it. He did not look good last year. And then you do get to the upside pieces. We'll start with Uakai in the mid lane. Took a year off. Last year was a substitute for LNG, but, you think back to 2 years ago, pretty interesting prospect on Invictus Gaming. Was somebody that I think rightfully so was getting a lot of looks. You've seen a lot of players from that team end up going to different rosters and actually being successful. Zika in the top lane for LNG now, and then obviously June in the jungle for Bilibili. Both having been on that team, having left, and then, been really good on their future teams with good talent around them. I think Uakai could be a player that falls into a similar situation. The problem being, I just don't think the talent around him is good enough to be able to propel him in that same way. Perhaps he can hyper carry this team, and considering the fact that mid lane for Ultra Prime was probably the weakest position in the entirety of the LPL for any team last year, they just couldn't find a suitable replacement for that role, whether it was Forge, whether it was Dream, whoever they brought in, it was miserable in that role. You're just hoping that Uakai is slightly better than that. I still have to ding him though, because he didn't play last year. He was a substitute for LNG, and honestly, it's not like he was a superstar before he stopped playing. He was just a really interesting young player for Invictus, and so he's got a lot to prove for me this year. And then there's Jue in the support position, the actual only rookie on this team, and I actually really like him. I was talking about this in my offseason grades video. Bilibili Jr. was a really fun team to watch, and I think a lot of it was because of him. He was one of the more interesting, if not the most interesting support prospects coming into the LPL this split, and it sucks that I think he's going to be on a team that just isn't very good. Maybe Uakai can generate more advantages than I think he can, and maybe him and Doggo can have good synergy in the bot lane 2v2, but, you know, I think it's going to be a rough rookie year for a rookie support, and that's unfortunate because I think the talent level is there for Jway. I just think the circumstance surrounding this team is just not going to be good enough, and I know it feels like I'm saying, well, if things got better, then maybe this player could do well to all the players, and so why would not all of it work out? But I just don't believe that Hacker is going to be able to generate consistent leads in the jungle. I don't believe that Decade is going to be able to actually survive in the 1v1 against a lot of the other good top laners in the LPL. Do I believe that Doggo and Jway are going to be able to win 2v2s regularly? No. Do I think Uakai is going to be able to save this team even if he is the best player? Probably not. Like, Ultra Prime is just very, very weak. I think this is an easy choice for number 17 for the last place in my rankings, and honestly, I would be surprised if they were a genuinely competitive team anywhere near the top 10. And now moving on to our second and only other team in the F tier here, coming in at number 16 in my power rankings. It is going to be LGD Gaming. I think they're the other team that I would consider near the bottom of the standings here. They just have some major holes, and even the parts of the team that I think are good, I don't think are good enough to actually let this team compete anywhere close to a top 10 placement. You know, we'll talk about this, but the two F-tier teams at the bottom are really the only two that I would be completely flabbergasted if they made top 10. Anywhere from 15 upwards, I think if they made top 10, if everything went right, I could reasonably believe like that is the case, but these two teams, I just don't see it happening in, which is why LGD comes down here at number 16. Important to, you know, note here, we'll talk about this when we get to some individual players, but these player rankings were done before Demacia Cup as well, which means that they may not be entirely updated, but the team rankings are updated, and honestly, just listen to how I talk about the players. That's going to be more important than the number below them anyway. So let's get into LGD. That's important for this team in particular, which I'll talk about why, but their lineup is looking like Bertle in the top lane, Meteor in the jungle, Haichao in the mid lane, Kepler at AD carry, and Jinzhao at support. You know, it looks like it's a strong top side and a weak bot side of the map, and I think that generally is, you know, the case, if you will, but, you know, I don't even think top side's really going to be all that dominant. Top lane has been a strength in basically every region that we've talked about up until this point. I think that is the case for a bit in the LPL, basically down to number 7 or 8, but like 9 to 17 are all a crapshoot. Like, top lane's not nearly as deep in the LPL, in my opinion, as it is in some of the other regions. There's a lot of upside, there's a lot of potential for these players to do well, and I do like Bertle, which we'll get into, but that number doesn't mean as much as it would, you know, in the mid lane or in the jungle position, you know, or even in top lane in a lot of the other regions, just for context. But let's talk about these players. Bertle is one of their big imports this offseason, or really their big import this offseason. I like Bertle, I think, more than other analysts. I really liked his spring split last year on Live Sandbox, but he got benched in summer for a good reason, because he was truly miserable down the stretch. It felt like he really lost his confidence, and that's really kind of the word that I want to use for Bertle in particular, is confidence, because that's really how he plays the game. That's something that seems to be very important to him, is his ability to play with that knowledge that he can win. He was doing that early on Sandbox when that team was overperforming expectations, being a lot better than people thought they were going to be. I think he was pretty motivated from that, and then in Summer Split, things started to go wrong again after a lot of these stints on top teams like Damwon with so many expectations that he just never was going to be able to live up to, and then I think he just collapsed in that circumstance, and, you know, that's okay. I think going to a team like LGD might be a good thing for him, because there really is no expectations surrounding Bertle, but mechanically speaking, he is a really good player. This is a guy who's been given starting spots on top tier teams in the past for a reason, because mechanically he can go up against a lot of the other best top laners in the world and actually hold his own. The problem is just doing it consistently and being able to do it in big high pressure moments. He's still going to come in at number 9 for me, because again, I like Bertle. I think mechanically speaking, he actually is a huge asset to this team, somebody that they can play for and really try to play through, but I just don't know if you're going to be able to do that every single game. But the other positive member for the team for me, and one of the 3 returning players on this team from last year, is Meteor. And Meteor coming into the jungle, he was the hard carry of this team last year, and I imagine that he'll fill a similar role for this team going into 2024. He is a carry player. That is a bit of the knock on him, is that he's really not a great facilitator, not somebody who loves to play these, you know, tanky engagers, as I've talked about, things like the Sejuani, things like the Maokai. It's just not really his style. He can play them, and he's not miserable at them, but you want him on Graves, you want him on Kindred, you want him on these marksmen that can carry carry from the jungle that want to be high resource in their own right so that they can be the primary focal point. That's always kind of been Meteor as a player, but specifically last year, that's what LGD did, and honestly, I would be surprised if they moved in a different direction. That just seems like the way that this team is built in general. Maybe they play towards topside more, maybe they play for mid lane more. Hell, maybe Kepler coming in at AD carry makes someone to play for bot lane more, but I would expect Meteor, who is still the best player on this team, to continue to be the primary focal point. I think he'll probably have another good individual year, maybe a little worse than last year because last year was really good, but I don't think that this team is going to win because of it. I think there's just too many holes outside of it, and I'll talk about that now because you are returning two players, one in the mid lane and one in the support position. We'll start with Haichao, and this is one of the players that I think I probably would have risen up a little bit in my rankings if I had done these after Demacia Cup, because he was actually surprisingly good at Demacia Cup. Bertle and Meteor were not good, and Kepler was really, really bad at Demacia Cup, and so Haichao had to take on a lot of the responsibility. He was doing relatively well in lane, and he's the kind of player that I think will do really well against players that he is just straight up more talented than, players that he can beat in a really strong way, but that's just not a huge list in the LPL. I think genuine LPL mid laners are better than him in a lot of different aspects, and that's why he does come in as my last ranked mid laner. I think realistically, you know, you want to put him closer to around 13, 14, 15, somewhere in that range. I know there are a lot of people on Reddit that like to hype up his potential, but I've been watching him for like 2 years, basically fully now. I've just never seen it. He's had good games here and there. I've just never seen any long-term sustainable reason to believe that he can turn into those good games every single game. And I don't know, you know, in year 3 now, I just don't really see it happening. Maybe the growth continues to develop, but it just isn't there for me. And because of that, he's going to come in at number 17. He's my least exciting mid laner, even if he did play well at Demacia Cup. And then Jin Zhao coming in at support. You know, he's coming in at number 16. Not a good player, but you know, he's serviceable, I guess. He's fine for this team. Very similar to what I said about Hacker on Ultra Prime, just a player that is pretty consistently going to be bottom of his role in terms of the output that he gives his team. Is going to have good games every once in a while. He's had more good games in the support position than I think I was expecting after he transitioned from AD carry to support, but he's never going to be like really good. He's always going to be near the bottom of this role. He comes in again at number 16 because there at least is some stability in the fact that he's played this role now for a couple of years, but I don't think he's very good at it, and so I'm not going to expect him to be able to break out. And then you've got Kepler in the bot lane. I mean, he's fine. ADCs are so stacked in the LPL. It's very deep. It's one of the deeper positions alongside mid lane, and Kepler just hadn't played very well this past year. I mean, I was actually very interested in him as a player when he was on ThunderTalk, when he was playing with Yao Yao, and he got an opportunity towards the end of 2022, but he goes back down to the LDL in 2023, and honestly, he just was not very good. Like, the tape was just not good. I didn't enjoy watching Kepler play. It felt like he got significantly worse. Maybe it's because he played with worse, you know, players last year, but for whatever reason, Kepler felt like he took a major step back, and that's what I'm going to have to rank him as right now. I don't think he's the type of player that is going to completely change the outlook of a team like LGD. Maybe you can play for him. Maybe you can give him some more resources. We saw in 2022 what could happen when he's put into a team and asked to be a bit more of a carry on ThunderTalk, and he actually did relatively well in that circumstance. But again, if he's anything close to what he was in 2023 rather than 2022, I just don't expect him to be a difference maker at the LPL level. So if you have the worst carry duo in the league in Haichao and Kepler, with the worst support, or one of the worst supports in Jin Zhao, you know, even if Meteor is carrying, he's not exactly facilitating. He's not making the rest of his team look better. Bertle is one of the most inconsistent players, you know, in any major region right now. It's just not a recipe for success for LGD. I do think they are significantly more talented than Ultra Prime. Ultra Prime was very clearly like the bottom tier team for me, the 17th ranked team, but LGD simply has to come in the same tier as them because just like Ultra Prime, I can't see a world in which this team overperforms their expectations enough to get into the playoffs or even come remotely close. I expect this to be the other of the two, you know, guaranteed bottom tier teams, and I think a lot of people would end up agreeing. But now that we are out of the F tier, it's time to move on to the D tier in this video. And as I kind of detailed in the last example, the D tier to me are teams that I really wouldn't expect to make playoffs, at least in their current iteration in the way that they've shown so far, but teams that I could realistically see overperforming this and potentially being, you know, contenders for it, be interesting throughout the split. You know, there are going to be weeks where it's like, oh, is this team a playoff team if they keep on this pace, and then they fall off? These are the kinds of teams that I believe will fall into that category. And it's funny because this is also the first team that has any sort of change because of Demacia Cup, and it's not a good one, falling down a couple of spots and coming in at number 15 for me. It is going to be FunPlus Phoenix, and I really wanted to put this team higher. As you can see from the trending, I originally had them 12th, before Demacia Cup, they were going to be one of the teams that I thought was really on the cusp, on the borderline of being a playoff team, because I like the way that they put together the bottom half of their map. I think if the top half ends up being serviceable, this could end up being a lower tier playoff team, but man, were they not good at Demacia Cup. They just didn't play well at all, and that's concerning because a lot of these players are kind of looking for bounce backs, or we're looking for more stability from them, and it really did not seem in the small, best of one sample size that we got that was there at all for FPX. A concerning amount to the point where I'm putting them down here at number 15. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Zhao Laohu in the top lane, Moyan in the jungle, Care in the mid lane, Dekdom and AD carry, and Life at support. I think there's good to this team. I think if you're looking for the positives from Demacia Cup, if you're looking for the takeaways that were good from this team playing together, I think Dekdom and Life looked really good when they were able to play against players that they were clearly significantly better than. They had two teams in their group, as everybody did, that were not LPL teams, and they absolutely massacred both of them, and Dekdom and Life were the two people that stepped up in both of those games. It was the bot lane that was the primary focus when FPX was able to win, but when they were losing, these two also lost pretty hard. I think a lot of this season is actually going to be on this bot lane more than, maybe some other bot lanes throughout the rest of this, section and this area, because if Dekdom is good, if Life is good, both of these guys have been world's caliber in their roles in the past. Dekdom has been there with Damwon, Life has been there with Gen G, and if both of them can get back to even remotely that standard together as players, that's really going to change things. But Dekdom coming off of a really weird year on DRX, obviously, that entire roster was a disaster. That team underperformed and disappointed throughout the entirety of that year, but for a lot of the spring split, I was arguing that Dekdom was the one player that was kind of actually performing on that team when Krako and Fate and all of these players and Rascal were all just playing so bad. Beryl especially were all just playing so bad in the spring split. It felt like Dekdom was trying to win games and trying his best, but then an injury pops up. I can't remember if it was wrist or elbow or related. It was something. He gets hurt. He ends up getting taken out of the lineup for Paddock, or for Pliata, at least at the end of the spring split, and then Paddock comes up to start the summer split, and he never comes back. He ends up playing in the LCK Challengers League, and he was dominant in the Challengers League, as he should be. He's a world's caliber ADC. He's played for Damwon before, but it was just a very weird year, and honestly, I was kind of expecting him to be better in 2024. I kind of thought this was going to be a bounce back year, and honestly, it still could be. He's one of the players, actually, he probably is the player that I'm the most excited for on this roster to see just what he can do in the LPL, but he's also not really the LPL style. He's a lot slower of an ADC, so definitely going to be intriguing to end up watching. And then you're pairing him up with another, Korean support here that is coming off of probably the worst year of their entire career in Life. Life is a player who I've actually sang the praises of a lot over the course of the beginning part of his career when you're talking about, obviously, his time on Gen G, but specifically that KT Rolster year, which was awesome. It really felt like he helped to revitalize Aiming's career and really get that bot lane back on track, and I was really excited to see what he could do with Viper on Hanwha last year, but man, it just did not end up working out. Life was, in particular, miserable on that team in their losses. He just was not a competent support player for most of last year, and it's very strange to see that because he's been a more than competent support player at his best for a lot of years now, not just a short amount of time. And so you're hoping that that's a bit of an outlier. Maybe it was just a synergy problem with Viper or with Hanwha or with Klid or with Grizzly or whoever was ending up being the problem on that team. You're hoping that it was just a team problem and not a Life problem, but Life was the player that was kind of getting destroyed in this bot lane when this team was losing to like Invictus Gaming at Demacia Cup. I still think this bot lane can be top, 8-ish in the LPL if everything goes right. It's just hard to predict that they're going to be that right now after what we've seen from them. The other player that I think I'm pretty good on, or at least feel good about, is Care in the mid lane. He is a bit more volatile, which is crazy to say, but Dekdom is a pretty consistent player, but, Care is probably the more volatile of the carries. I just think Care's talent level is ridiculously high. I think that he is a very, very mechanically talented mid laner. He's somebody who I've really gone to bat for in the past, as somebody who's been carrying FPX more than he gets credit for. I talked about in the grades video, and people are really upset when I say this, because I think there's just I don't want to say an inherent bias towards this player, but I think people remember the good days and don't so much remember the bad days. But LWX was really bad for this team last year. Like, he was a huge negative for them. Care was winning a lot of games for this team. It just wasn't enough. He ended up trailing off as the season went on anyways, and it really felt like he was mentally starting to get a bit tilted. Hopefully that doesn't happen on this team, but I think Care could actually be a primary carry in the mid lane, which is why, again, I talk about, this team and all the teams here being an upgrade over what we've talked about. I have two players on this team that I could realistically see actively carrying games consistently for them in Care, and Dectum. That's pretty darn good, and Life is a decent player, but none of them have shown any level of consistency. And then you get to the top side, Zhao Lao, who's coming back here for, I believe, the 4th straight year on FPX. You know, it took him 3 years, but he finally started to figure something out last year in 2023. Easily had the best split of his entire career in summer when Care started to fall off, when LWX was playing miserable. In the summer split, it was Zhao Laohu who was the one that was actually picking up a lot of the slack and a lot of the pace. This team almost made playoffs. I mean, they really didn't, but they finished 11th in summer. That's, you know, 1 spot out. You know, it wasn't close in terms of record, but, you know, they had an opportunity there, and, you know, it was really good to see Zhao Laohu finally get to that stage and that level that I think this org had kind of always wanted him to get to. The problem is expecting him to be able to continue that. I hope that he's able to continue being, you know, an average to above average top laner in the LPL, but do I guarantee that's going to happen? Absolutely not. He was the worst LPL top laner for a long time before that. He was ranking in the bottom 2, bottom 3 every single year in my primer, no matter how many chances FPX gave him. And so, do I really believe that all that's going to change going into 2024? No, but I think you have to give him credit for growing last year and being better, and, you know, hopefully he can be able to he can have the opportunity to be able to carry that over and continue playing at that high level. And then you've got a rookie in the jungle. You've got Moyan coming in. There is hype around Moyan. I'm not nearly as excited about him as I am for some other rookie junglers. You know, we'll talk about Nayu and players like that as we go further along, but Moyan's a solid player. He was on the best LDL team in the summer split last year with Max taking the title, and he was a part of that team, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to transition to this roster. He was another player who looked pretty outmatched when this team was playing like genuine LPL teams in Demacia Cup, and that's really going to be something to monitor. If he's not good enough to be able to play at this level, that's really going to affect FPX. I think they were the team that also brought Milky Way in, another former LDL jungler, which I think is good to have that kind of, you know, 6th man, especially on your most volatile position in a spot that really needs to be good. If Moyan's not good, maybe Milky Way can come in. I think Milky Way might even be the better prospect, but, you know, we'll end up seeing Moyan's definitely going to start the season. If him and Care can develop some synergy, if Dectum and Life can actually win 2v2 and be the stabilizing presence, if Zhao Laohu is closer to 2023 than 2022 or 2021 version of himself, I do think there's, you know, an opportunity here. There was a reason this team came in 12th originally in my power rankings, because I think from a talent perspective, you could argue that this is a, you know, top 12 team in the LPL. The problem is I just don't know if these pieces are going to work together. I think, you know, so far we've seen them kind of be less than the sum of their parts, but it is just best of one. So you're hoping that they can figure stuff out and really start to stabilize as the year goes on. And now moving on to number 14, still in the middle of the D tier here. Still teams that I think could make things interesting, but overall to me aren't playoff teams. But coming in at number 14, we go from one world champ to another. It's Invictus Gaming at 14. And I think this is really the only fair placement for them on this list, right above FPX, because they won a best of one against FPX. Typically, I would look at these two rosters and I would say that, you know, FPX's is better, but it wasn't on that day. Invictus's was better, and honestly, there's really not enough evidence for me to believe that that is an outlier. Like, we talked about a team in LGD that had a big win over OMG at that tournament, but, like, do I believe that's an outlier? Yes, I believe that that is an outlier, but, you know, Invictus could very well be better than FPX. They're very similar teams, and so to see IG coming out on top when they played, it gives me the confidence to put them just directly above them here at number 14, but still, this team definitely has its problems. They definitely have their concerns, none of which is, you know, continuity with them bringing back all 5 members from last year. But as I said in my offseason analysis video, that's not always a good thing when it comes to teams like this. So let's talk about it. Their lineup is looking like You Should Know Me in the top lane, Tianjin in the jungle, Cryan in the mid lane, On at AD carry, and Wink at support. Again, all 5 members returning from Invictus last year, but the big concern with that is the fact that this team did get pretty noticeably worse as the year went on. They started off spring incredibly hot. They had Gideon and Dove in there in the jungle and in the mid lane, and things were kind of working for this team. Everything was feeling good. You Should Know Me, in particular in the top lane, was really starting to break out. On and Wink were winning lanes super consistently in the bot lane, and this team had a lot of different win conditions, but they really fell off. I mean, they went like 0-8 for their last couple of series. Like, it was really, really bad towards the back half. They ended up missing playoffs, just barely getting under 500, even after, like, a phenomenal start. And going into summer, they wanted to make changes. They promote Tianjin from their LDL team. You know, Gideon is gone. They bring in Cryan, obviously somebody who's formerly gone to Worlds with RNG, so, you know, experience in the mid lane, and they hope that that can fix it. And honestly, it really didn't. This team was very mediocre, very non-exciting in the summer split, and a lot of the players that were exciting in the spring split regressed a lot. You Should Know Me was not as good in summer. The bot lane was not as good in summer, and that's concerning. All of that to lead into the fact that I think the new players are also not particularly answers in those roles. And so we can talk about them individually, but I'm really not like stoked about this team going into 2024. We'll start in the top lane with You Should Know Me because he is going to be the one that gets a lot of attention from a lot of the analysts. He is an interesting player, man, because he's so aggro, he's so risky, and he's an Invictus Gaming top laner. And so you have to imagine that he's going to develop, because when you think of Invictus Gaming top laners, you think of the Shy, you think of Zika, and now it's You Should Know Me. Like, that's been the legacy over the past like 6 or so years on this roster, you know, since 2018, really. And so, you know, you're hoping You Should Know Me can develop and really turn into that player that I think a lot of people want him to be. But is he that player now? I don't think so. I think that breakout at the beginning of spring was certainly flashy, but it really wasn't sustainable in the way that he was doing it. He was taking a lot of teams off guard with really crazy invades, really crazy, you know, trading patterns, just things that weren't all that typical of other top laners in the region at the time. I think teams got really used to him, though. They started protecting against a lot of the very aggressive, you know, punishable plays that he ended up going for, and they did end up punishing those plays a lot over the course of the summer split in the second half of spring, and he just wasn't nearly as effective as a player. He was kind of a middling to lower, you know, half top laner in the LPL over the second half of the year. If he can continue to grow, maybe find another way to get that raw mechanical talent that we know he has out in a more sustainable way, I still think he could be a very fun and like near top tier top lane prospect. He has been that at points in the LPL already. It's just about making sure that he can do it in a consistent, sustainable way that doesn't rely on the enemy team messing up rather than, you know, him actively going out and making a good play. And then you've got On and Wink. I'm going to skip over Tianjin and Cryan because they were the new players to the team. We'll talk about On and Wink. They were the other strong part of this team in the spring split, and I don't want to give up on them entirely, but there are reasons to be concerned that spring was a bit of an outlier in comparison to career norms for both of these players, more so for On. I was really high on in spring. I thought he was the one in particular that was making a lot of the big plays happen, was playing so aggro as an AD carry, was actively going out and creating his own advantages in the mid game. That's something I really ask AD carries to do a lot on this channel, and very few are capable of doing that consistently, which is why I had such a high opinion of him going into the summer split. But things just fell off the rails. His mechanics got worse. His decision-making got worse. I can't really explain it. It almost felt like he completely crashed back down to earth. On was the player that I felt it was like sustainable for out of these two in the bot lane, but honestly, that was kind of the opposite. I was wrong about that. On definitely regressed back to being one of the worst AD carries in the league in summer split. Obviously, he's still going to get a pretty high ranking here because the upside was there, and if he can just get that consistency back under his belt, like, he's good as a player. I just need to see it, man. It's very likely that he goes either up or down on this list. I would be very shocked if he was just a middle-of-the-road AD carry in the league. I imagine he's either going to be very good or very bad for this team, and then Wink in the support position is a very similar story, but in kind of a different way. I honestly thought On was the one that was carrying them in spring when this bot lane was doing really well isolated in the 2v2, and then as things got worse, it seemed like Wink kind of got better. Like, he ended up becoming the best player on this team for a lot of the second half of the year, alongside Cryan, of course, but Wink, you know, was really kind of solid over the second half, and I think he actually has shown a lot of growth and development as a support the more time he's been given in that role. I like him moving forward. There was a reason I think other teams were interested this offseason. I think there is a lot of potential for him in that position, and, you know, generally speaking, I like, you know, him moving forward. Do I think that it's going to work with this bot lane? I hope so, because you know, these two obviously like playing together. They've done it for 2.5 straight years at this point, but you know, it's going to be interesting, or a year and a half, not 2.5. What am I talking? A year and a half straight at this point, but, you know, we're going to have to see it because, again, they did get worse in the summer split. And then the two new players coming in, you had Cryan, the veteran, coming in the mid lane, and he was honestly pretty good for this team. 13 feels like a very low ranking. It's the second lowest on this team, but again, you have to remember the middle of the mid lane, you know, rankings is all really good. I mean, basically, like, almost number 5 or 6 to like number 13 is all one cluster of player. The amount of Bs or B minuses, you know, in the LPL is staggering at the given moment in terms of just the talent level. And so don't take 13 as like a negative towards Cryan. He is a solid starter and one of the more consistent ones on this team. I don't think he's a star. I don't think he's somebody that is eventually going to get himself back onto one of the better teams in the league, but, you know, for a bottom tier team, Cryan is a very solid mid laner to have. A lot of teams at this level don't have good mid laners. Cryan is one of the good mid laners that I think actually does exist on one of these teams and, you know, can help your team. I just don't think he's going to be the hard carry that gets your team over the top. And if he's your best player, that's a problem. And then you've got Tianjin in the jungle. You know, they really like this guy. A lot of other LDL and LPL analysts really like this guy. I've seen him talked up on a lot of co-streams by a lot of analysts that I like and respect. And, you know, I said it last year, I never saw it in the LDL. The tape just never really popped to me. He seemed like a player that really relied on his champion pool, and when he was off it, he was just kind of invisible in a lot of those games. And that very much proved to be true when he came to the LPL last year, where he was probably the worst jungler in the LPL. I mean, you can make an argument for someone like Ning, but Ning was winning games too. He was just losing a lot of them in that same vein. Tianjin just didn't have a lot of good games, and almost all of them were on Graves. And, you know, outside of that, Rengar, obviously, we know is like a big pick for him. It just isn't a very diverse and helpful champion pool for him to have, and I really am not expecting a ton of growth from him this year. I'm much lower on him as a player, and that's another reason why I'm low on Invictus. I don't expect this team to have a lot of prio in the early game, because I don't think that Tianjin is a very good early game jungler. I think they're going to rely a lot on their side lanes, and You Should Know Me and On and Wink to be able to generate that prio and Cryan for the late game team fighting, and, you know, that's possible. Like, these are all solid players. I just don't know if any of them are elite enough, and I really don't know playstyle-wise, like, who's going to be able to consistently win, because that was the problem for them in summer of last year, like I said, is that players like Cryan and Wink were their best players, but they're not players that can just actively win you games against other teams in the LPL. You need a stronger win condition like On, or You Should Know Me, or Tianjin stepping up and actively being, you know, a focal point that this team can play through. And, you know, until they show that they can do that, I just have to rank them pretty low again. They also fall one spot from 13th to 14th. That has more to do with other teams, or one other team moving up in the standings rather than Invictus, you know, being awful. This is still kind of the team that I expected them to be, but really, I'm just not sold that this team is definitely going to improve from a last year where the arrow was certainly heading down. And then moving on to number 13, continuing the middle of the D tier here. It's a team that I think I'm a bit higher on than maybe others, but I don't really know why. This team is clearly better than the other two in this tier that we've talked about, in my opinion. It's ThunderTalk Gaming. I really like this roster, and I know they're running back all, you know, or not all five, but 4 of the 5 members from a team that, you know, went 5-11, even worse than what Invictus did in the summer split. But this was a playoff team in spring. They were above 500, and honestly, they were showing a lot of growth. And even towards the back half of summer, when they weren't winning, like, a couple of these players were playing out of their minds and were really interesting. They just had some pretty major flaws and holes that I think were off the rift related. It felt like there was a lot of noise and a big cloud kind of surrounding this team and this organization last year, and I just don't think that that is there going into 2024. I think they will perform better, and for me, that means going up to number 13 here, leapfrogging Invictus after watching Demacia Cup. But, you know, let's talk about their 2024 and reasons to be excited about them. Their lineup is looking like Hoya in the top lane, Beishwan in the jungle, Yukal in the mid lane, 1xN at AD carry, and Chocho at support. This team played together during Demacia Cup and actually finished better than the team that I have ranked one spot above them in 12th. They actually beat them in the group stage. You know, spoiler alert for who that is, but I think that this is a team that deserves to be, you know, at least studied with a little bit more caution. Best of ones aren't always the best indicator of who the best teams are, but I do think this team looking good and looking good in the way that is reminiscent of what they were able to win with last year is very, very encouraging. That mostly being winning through mid lane, winning through Yukal, you know, him being the star of the show, if you will, for ThunderTalk. He was last year. I mean, a complete career resurgence here, a re-breakout for Yukal in 2023. I think you could even make the argument that individually speaking, purely from a mechanics and, you know, individual carry perspective, it was the best year of Yukal's career. I certainly think that obviously his years back in the LCK on KT Rolster and other such teams, you know, definitely are really good, and going to watch, you know, those back, you know, I was almost reminded of how good Yukal used to be when I went and rewatched him, you know, a couple of months ago. But, you know, really individually speaking, I don't know if he's ever been given as much responsibility as he had on this ThunderTalk team last year, and he absolutely stepped up. This felt like a player that came over to the LPL as kind of a, you know, late career. You know, sometimes when you don't play well in the LCK, you have to get another shot in the LPL in order to, like, actually retire. You know, LPL bottom tier teams will pay for Koreans basically no matter what, right? And Yukal's a big name, but he has very much justified whatever price tag he ended up coming over here for, because he truly has been one of the best mid laners in the LPL since he came over in 2022. 7 is about as high as I can put him. Just again, there's so many good mid laners that have been impacts on big, like, successful LPL teams, like Worlds and Borderline Worlds teams. Like, that's the conversation that Yukal is in. When I tell you that the LPL mid lane, you know, pool is stacked, like, you should already know that, but, like, Yukal's at number 7. Like, that's how stacked the LPL pool is with how good Yukal was last year. And again, like I said, he was like that in Demacia Cup as well. He was dominating people. He was really looking good, even against a lot of other mid laners that I like. in that group stage. And so I believe in this team, if only because I really believe in UCal, and I think he should be able to get them across the finish line no matter what. He's going to make them competitive no matter what. Do I guarantee that he's going to be a playoff mid laner because of that? No, that's why I have this team at 13 and not at 10, right? But I think this team will be relevant, if only because of UCal. And then we'll talk about the top side next. You got Hoya in the top lane, had, basically the opposite situation of UCal. He actually came over in 2022 in Summer Split and was pretty good for this team, was kind of a stabilizing force in the top lane for ThunderTalk, really kind of gave them an opportunity to play for other lanes because he could survive isolated in 1v1, similar to what I think a lot of people are hoping Bertle can be for LGD, but Hoya had the worst year of his career by a long shot in 2023. He was miserable, easily the worst player on this team last year, and that is a bit of an accomplishment with how bad Beishuan and Yao Yao were for parts of the Summer Split last year. Hoya was just awful, awful, awful. They were losing games through top lane very consistently when they went up against some of the better top laners in the region. Hoya would get destroyed, and that's a problem. If he can get back to even being remotely stable like he has been in years past in 2024, you absolutely take that. Like, having a stable, player in the top lane that won't win or lose you a ton of games so you can play towards a lot of your carries, that's what you want here. But Hoya's going to have to prove that he can be that guy because he really was not that last year. And then there's Beishuan. I like Beishuan. He's been a my guy, a channel darling, if you will, in the past here for ThunderTalk, and I do think that he's still kind of in that zone for me. I definitely have to admit that summer was really bad for him. It was the worst split of his entire career by a pretty large margin, but I think there's a lot of reason to believe that that was more circumstance than it was talent. It wasn't necessarily him playing bad, but I think rather he just didn't feel confident at all. He was not making plays. He was playing so passive, and that's just not the Beishuan that I know. That's not the Beishuan that I really went to bat for a long time. This is a player that I've really liked, basically ever since 2021, 2022. I've really gone to bat for Beishuan as a player that deserves to be starting in the LPL, no matter, the quote-unquote controversy surrounding Xiao Huangren. And, I think Beishuan deserves to be, ranked pretty highly because of that. He's going to come in at number 12. That's as high as I can justify putting him on the list, but I would expect him to be a lot better in 2024 than he was in 2023, and if that's the case, if he is like the good version of himself alongside UCal, that's very scary. We kind of saw a bit of that in Demacia Cup, where I think both of these two did play well. And then you've got a very interesting bot lane. 1xN is returning here, was kind of the summer starter for this team in that bot lane role. Huanfeng is still here. He is contracted to ThunderTalk, and obviously I'm a big Huanfeng fan. In-game, that is. I want to preface that. That's an important distinction to make, but, 1xN is an interesting AD carry prospect. Do I think he's there right now? No, I don't think he was there in Summer Split. I think he showed a lot of upside, similar to a lot of the other players that he's ranked around in this spot, players that have, potential, like, top 5 or 6 upside if everything goes right by the end of the year, but I'm going to need to see that growth. He was definitely more of a flip-floppy player than people give him credit for. Again, potential. That's really what you're bringing him back here for. If he's bad, maybe you can put Huanfeng back into that starting lineup and stabilize there, because I do think he would stabilize basically immediately, especially with a pretty stable support in Chocho here. And I like Chocho. He's just been a good support for quite a long time. He does come a bit lower than I would have wanted him to on this ranking, but support was actually a little bit more crowded than I thought it would be here in the LPL. Chocho's a solid player. He's really not going to be a liability to any of the teams that he's on. Maybe he's not going to push them forward, although there are going to be games where he looks really good, but he's a good signing here if you want to stabilize and give 1xN an opportunity to really grow with a stable support here. I think Chocho is a good addition in that respect, because Yao Yao, as much as I like him, as much as I was really pushing for him in 2022, was just kind of a disaster for a lot of last year. Obviously, circumstances abound, but, I think Chocho will do a good job of stabilizing this bot lane. And again, also similar, if Chocho is bad, Huanfeng has reportedly been practicing at support. And so, if Chocho is not the guy that you think he is, and if he ends up having problems for some reason, you can put Huanfeng in and play 1xN and Huanfeng as your bot lane. But generally, a lot of the excitement surrounding this team for me, and for a lot of other people, is surrounding UCal. If UCal has another really big year, this team is going to be somewhere around playoff contention, again, just because he is that good, especially if players like Beishuan and 1xN can take that next step up. But there are also worlds in which UCal is the only good player here, or maybe he's not as good as he was last year, and, 1xN, struggles, and Chocho's not really, a game breaker, and Beishuan and Hoya continue to struggle on the top side of the map. There are outcomes for this team, which is why they can only come in at number 13 for me, but still, I think D tier is relatively accurate for them. They're a team that's going to be at least in the playoff picture, and they're going to be a tough out in basically any game they play. And then we get to move on to number 12 in the power rankings, and this is going to be the final team in D tier. Like I said, D tier are teams that I think probably aren't going to be playoff teams, but could be interesting. Like, definitely could make a run. And honestly, if any of the teams in D tier are going to push through and make the playoffs, it's going to be this team. But there were a lot of concerns that I had, especially after seeing Demacia Cup. And coming in at number 12, it is going to be anyone's Legend. I like this team. I really do. And honestly, in my original power rankings, as you can see, they came in 11th. They were a tier above. They're actually the first team that we've talked about to have dropped down an entire tier because of their Demacia Cup performance, but I think it's only fair. This team was just not very good at that tournament. I mean, they got destroyed by ThunderTalk. UCal really kind of blew them up, if we're being entirely honest. Really good game coming in from him, but even in their wins, like, they didn't look all that dominant. Like, Shanks was okay in their one win over EDG, which was fine. But I really didn't see I didn't see what I wanted to see from this team full of veterans, full of players that I think are looking to rebound and really come together to make a strong unit. After all, essentially coming off of years that I think they wish they had done better in. Basically, everybody except for top lane on this team is a veteran coming off of a year that was just kind of fine for them. And, you know, maybe with the exception of Shanks, who was pretty good last year, but, you know, Krako, Hope, and Kale, I think, are all looking to re-cement themselves near the top of the standings. And I'm just not sold that that is going to happen, especially after watching this team play, and especially with AL kind of being a black hole for talent over the past couple of years. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Harry in the top lane, Krako in the jungle, Shanks in the mid lane, Hope at AD carry, and Kale at support. Of course, this is a very talented roster in terms of, you know, the heights that all of them have achieved. Krako at one point in time was one of the best players in the LCK, certainly one of the best junglers back on Sandbox, whether it was him winning Rookie of the Year over Owner, which people tend to forget about, or him just being phenomenal in 2022 on that team with Prince and Kale. Obviously, nice to see that synergy here. Kale obviously was on that team with Prince and with Krako and, you know, almost made a Worlds run on that team, but even before that, and even after that, he was pretty good, except, you know, in summer of last year, where everything really started to collapse in. Him and Teddy did not have synergy. And then you have Shanks, who's kind of been the rock for WE for quite a long time, when that team was really struggling, when that team was really, you know, awful. When they were 0-16 and not able to pick up any wins in the regular season, Shanks was still, you know, trugging along, you know, being a pretty good player for them. And then you have Hope, who's been to World Semifinals on LGD Gaming and, you know, was not the carry of that team, but was somebody who was, you know, a good enough piece for you to be able to be one of the best teams in the world with him. And, you know, all of these players are, you know, really coming off of, you know, like I said, seasons or splits that weren't ideal for them, but that was the reason for optimism. It was a lot of collection of talent. Like, these players are all technically in better situations, I think, than they were last year, and I think that was looked at positively. And even someone like Harry, kind of a young player, kind of on the rise in the top lane, this is a significantly better situation than what he was in last year on Ultra Prime, and so there was optimism surrounding this team, but individually, I think you just have to hope for the rebound on a lot of these players, and that's why there's a lot of volatility when it comes to AL. When you look at Krako's 2023 on DRX, disaster of a year. He got benched midway through for Juhan because that team simply can't figure out whether or not they want to play Juhan. But Krako, you know, was supposedly brought in to be this super consistent and, you know, high-profile jungler. He was the piece that they wanted to build around, but they simply couldn't. He was so bad for a majority of the year that they couldn't even reliably put him in the starting lineup. I do think that his problems were bigger than just his individual play, and that was very clear, especially towards the back half of summer, when things started to go better, and he didn't really change all that much. He just had more lanes to be able to play towards, but he's got to be able to get back to that stage that he was at on Sandbox for this team to work at all. He's a big piece of what they have, and it's the same thing for Kale. Like, I love Kale. He is absolutely a channel darling. He is somebody who I've gone, you know, to great lengths to hype up on this channel over the course of his career. He's somebody who I really like. At one point, I was talking about him as a potential top 5 support in the world, not just in the LCK. That's how good he was, in my opinion, you know, a couple of years ago, but it just wasn't a great summer split. Him and Teddy did not have very good chemistry. That team completely fell apart just in general, and he was a part of that. He did play poorly, but, you know, you have a lot of hope that he's going to be able to bounce back. He comes in as my number 8 support because I do trust him a lot as a player, and I expect him to be good. And then you have Shanks and Hope, who are coming off of okay years. They made playoffs on WE, which was expected, especially after the roster upgrade in summer, but it was still really good to see. But at the same time, you were hoping that maybe this team could do a little bit more. Hope is just kind of fine, and he certainly had his ups and downs over the course of 2023, but he was not a superstar. And, you know, I think we all could have predicted that coming off of the JDG year. He never really was a superstar or a stud for that team. He was kind of just along for the ride. He was a stabilizing presence. that allowed them to be able to win games that they put in midway through the year. And obviously, he's an interesting player. He's not bad. He comes in as my number 980 carry. He'll win you some games, but he definitely has problems with consistency, and he's not going to be an all-pro caliber guy. And you know, really where you're looking for that kind of upside is in the mid lane with Shanks. I do think Shanks has all-pro upside if everything does start to go right. He was a hard carry, like I said, for some really bad WE teams over the course of his career. And last year, I do think he was the best player on WE. He formed a really good connection with his jungler Hang, and I think just generally they made the team better, but if this team is going to, you know, overperform the expectations I have set for them, it's probably because Shanks does take that next leap. And, you know, we're wondering whether or not that leap exists or whether or not he's just going to kind of sit in this role of being a really good mid laner, you know, someone a la like Fofo. But he could be better than that. I mean, this is a guy who theoretically could be top 3 or top 4 in the position if everything went right. He certainly is mechanically talented enough, and this is probably the best overall team he has ever played with in terms of talent. And so there's definitely at least some consideration being left there for that. But at the end of the day, you know, all of these pieces have to come true. We haven't even talked about Harry. I'm a bit lower on the current ability of Harry. I think that's the way I put it in my other videos for, you know, some FM players out there, if you will. But, you know, Harry has a lot of potential. He is somebody who I think it's clear that he has the mechanics and the mentality to become one of the scarier top laners in the LPL. I just think people are a little bit quick on the draw here. He had a lot of problems last year in that same vein. He was really bad in spring, and he got a lot better in summer. He really started to show a lot of the potential, the reason that he was brought onto that roster, but you know, he is somebody that I really need to see growth from this year, or else I'm going to start to get concerned. There are a couple of players in the LPL that I think fans like to hype up maybe a bit prematurely, and I think he definitely falls into that. That's why he is only coming in as the number 14 top laner, but the potential absolutely is there. And if he does take that like second big leap this year in year 2, then this actually is a very complete and well-rounded roster, so long as you do get those good performances from players like Kroko and Kale and Shanks and Hope. And, you know, I think that kind of team is a playoff team. If Harry hits, if Kroko hits, if Kale hits, that's a playoff team. I think we can all say that with a lot of confidence, because at that point, they're just a better version of what WE was last year. But those are question marks for this team. And like I said, I don't think Demacia Cup was a very good indicator that all of those things are going to happen. Obviously, this team has a lot of time to figure things out. They have a lot of time to figure out kind of the dynamic that they want to play with, but there are also reasons to be concerned. That's why they come in at number 12 and in the D tier for me. Anyone's Legend as an organization has a history of, especially on this channel, being ranked pretty high in the preseason and never living up to that. Look at last year, 16th, 16th, although their team is significantly better than it was last year. This was the worst team in the LPL across the entire year last year, 17th in terms of championship points. They're going to have to be better than that, but you know, I think if there was ever going to be a roster that ended up doing it a complete roster and not just a couple of players, it's probably this one for me. And now moving on to number 11 in the power rankings, a pretty important number because that is the final non-projected playoff team in the LPL. Of course, top 10 ends up making it, but we are making a tier jump up to C tier, and I want to make that abundantly clear. D tier, like I said, were teams that I think really wanted to be competitive, and like best case scenario, they make playoffs, but I honestly think everybody in C tier kind of expects to make it, which is, or C tier and above, I should say, expects to make playoffs, is expected to make playoffs, and you know, that's not how it works. There's 11 teams in that bracket, only 10 of them can make it, so somebody's going to have to be on the out, and at least for now, it's the biggest riser from before Demacia Cup and then after Demacia Cup. It's Rare Adam, and honestly, this team, I don't even really know how to describe or talk about, you know, what this team's rise was like during Demacia Cup, but they were amazing. They played ridiculously over their skill level during that tournament, or I say over their skill level, but honestly, there are 3 players on this team that I think could be superstars in the LPL, or at least like top 5 in their position by the end of the split, let alone like by the end of the year. I think there really are 3 players here that I could see being incredibly good, and this team was awesome at Demacia Cup. Not only did they win their group, which obviously is a pretty difficult thing to do in Demacia Cup, they had an easier group than most. They had Invictus and FPX, which is certainly there, but still, they go out and they're able to win that group. They're able to go undefeated. They're able to get into the bracket stage. Also, they were below both of those teams in my pre-Demacia Cup power rankings. I would have thought they were the worst of those 3, but nope, they're the best. And then they go into the bracket. They get slotted against LNG. Okay, it's cool. You had an easy group and you got out. No, they're going to beat LNG in a best of 5 3-1. Like, they're not just going to beat them. They're going to dominate LNG in a best of 5. That is ridiculously impressive. And honestly, if you're looking for a potential breakout team in 2024 that not a lot of people are talking about, Rare Atom is probably the pick for that. Now, you might notice the numbers on the screen don't necessarily match the hype that I'm giving them. Again, I have to tell you, I did these player rankings before Demacia Cup, and so a lot of this is my, floor ranking for a lot of these players, but, we'll talk over the course of this segment about why I'm so much higher on them than other people. So let's do it. Their lineup is looking like Xiaoshu in the top lane, Neyu in the jungle, Vikla in the mid lane, Assume at AD carry, and Xiaoxi at support. A lot of players here that were, interesting pieces for their own individual teams last year. Obviously, you've got players like Xiaoshu and Assume returning here. Those are the two returnees for Rare Atom, and they're absolutely the two that should be coming back. Xiaoshu in particular was amazing over the second half of last year. He was my pick for Summer Split, Rookie of the Split, and, even Rookie of the Year. I think he was definitely in that conversation, depending on how you want to view Leaves, Spring Split, but Xiaoshu was awesome for me. He was the clear choice for that. And he's just a player. We talked about Harry in the previous segment as this really high potential player who might just not be there right now. It might take a little bit of time for him to continue to develop. We haven't exactly seen the breakout of him yet. I think Xiaoshu is a lot closer to that than a player like Harry is. Xiaoshu is really just very, very, very good. And to me, he's already a top 10 top laner, but he could be like number 1 in a couple of years if everything continues to develop. I mean, he could be a potential superstar if he gets the right kind of talent around him. I'm not sure if this is the team for it, but you can see it. Coming into this year, he is the highest ranked player in their position of anybody on this team. And I think that's fair. I think he's got the highest floor of anybody because of just how good he was. Now, he can be a little bit, flip-floppy, a little bit inconsistent, I guess is the word I'm looking for, but most of those kind of got weeded out towards the back half of summer. He honestly is just a very solid top laner that has room to get even better as the year goes on. The player that he reminds me the most of is Shanji. They're the players that I compared a lot. They don't have incredibly similar champion pools, but in terms of their mentality around playing the game, at least for what it feels like their mentality is, both of them, very much remind me of each other, and that's a very good thing for Xiaoshu because Shanji is a very good player, so they're happy to bring him back. They bring Assume back as well in the bot lane. I'm a bit lower on Assume. He's in that cluster of players that I was talking about earlier in some of these rankings where it's like, the LPL loves to hype up young players as the next up-and-coming, star, especially in the AD carry role. We talked about it with 1xN. Before that, it was Doggo, right? There's always these players that seem to be coming through the system that, the fans describe as next. And, Assume has kind of gotten that level and that radar from a lot of fans. I don't necessarily see it. I think he's a good player. I don't know if he's ever going to be a great player. He makes a lot of mistakes, and honestly, he's kind of passive, which is never really something that you want out of an AD carry in the LPL. You can get away with that in other regions. It's really hard to get away with that in the LPL. It's hard to scale into late game if you don't really have a lot of strong pressure in the 2v2, or if you're not a phenomenal mid-game team fighter like someone like Ruler is, and so I do end up being a bit lower on him because of that, but he's still good enough. You can absolutely win with him, and, there's a reason people see potential in him. It's because I do think he has the chance of getting better. I wouldn't hinge my franchise on it, and, I think he probably is the weak link of this team, and I think that is okay. Yeah, that's certainly a circumstance that you can play around if Assume is your worst player. That's really not all that bad. You get to pair him up with Xiaoxi, who is coming back to the LPL here, spent a year in the PCS, played with the Flying Oysters last year, made Worlds, looked really good at the World Championships, and is now back in the LPL. He's always been a pretty good player in my eyes, and in the LPL level, we talked about a player in Chocho just a couple of, teams ago that is, the definition of stable, solid, average to, slightly above average support at this level. I think Xiaoxi fits that description just as well. They're very similar in terms of talent. I put Chocho slightly ahead of him, but they're basically the same player, and they will basically get the same grade for me. It's nice to have a player like that to stabilize on the bot side, especially when you have a younger AD carry. Same thing I talked about with ThunderTalk. I think these bot lanes are incredibly comparable. Assume and Xiaoxi, to me, is almost identical to 1xN and Chocho. So whatever I said about them, just copy and paste it over here. And then you've got a really, really fun mid-jungle, and this is where the upside of the team comes in and why I think I'm higher on this team and why they really succeeded at Demacia Cup, in the Demacia Cup, and that's Neyu and Vikla. Vikla is somebody who I've always been, I shouldn't say always, who I've been high on for the last year or so. I defended his LCS run to death because I felt like he got a lot of shit from fans who were just very, very ready to turn on him because he was an import, and there was this narrative surrounding FlyQuest that everyone was hoping they would lose because they went out and bought, a good team. Oh, heaven forbid an LCS team actually try to build a roster for once, and, I think people people were really kind of predispositioned to not like Vikla, and I thought he was really good for the most part. Summer obviously was a bit of a disaster, but mentally I understand why things were going wrong for him at that point, but he was really good in spring. He was my first team all-pro mid laner in the spring split in the LCS. I thought he was the best mid in spring in the LCS, at least in the regular season, and for him to come back over here to the LPL, this is a player that I think will thrive in this environment. He is somebody who loves to play super aggro, super in your face. He wants to try and take early trades, and honestly, if we see a bounce back for Vikla and he becomes a top 5 player in the mid lane in the LPL this split, I'm not going to be surprised. He was awesome at Demacia Cup. Very similar to what I said about UCal, I'll say about Vikla. I think this is the kind of player that you can play through every game if he's on, and he'll carry. He's obviously a little more unproven, a little more inconsistent, but he can absolutely get to that stage. And then Nayu in the jungle. I talked even earlier about potential future jungle rookies that I think are interesting to watch. Nayu is my pick for Rookie of the Year. I think he's my favorite rookie coming into the split. Obviously, it's tough competition because you've got players like Sheer and Fisher that are going to be on probably better teams and probably going to get more resources and therefore probably look better. But to me, talent-wise, Nayu is amazing. I can't believe an organization like Rare Atom was able to bring him in. I think his floor is actually very high. He was my favorite player to watch in the LDL last year. To me, he was the best prospect coming up. And so I'm really excited to see what he can do at the LPL level. He's had a very small sample size in Demacia Cup already, but he was really good in that tournament. He just out-jungled Weiwei, like just straight up in the 1v1. He was just better than Weiwei, which is certainly something to keep in mind. I'm way lower on Weiwei. We'll get to that later, but Nayu is a good player, and he's somebody that I could really see being a major impact. Somebody who in a year's time might not even be on this Rare Atom org, might be on one of the top 5 orgs instead, because, I mean, truly he is like a game changer, a game breaker, and I'm really excited to see what he can do and pair him up with a player like Vikla, who mechanically speaking can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the LPL. Xiaoshu, who I'm expecting to take a jump. If Asum and Xiaoxi are your, weak lane, your weak side lane, your stable lane, this team's actually going to be really good. And their performance in Demacia Cup does have me very intrigued. I'm very excited about this team. Like I said, if you want a breakout team for 2024, I think Rare Atom is a pretty good bet because I think a lot of these players are going to show that maybe some of the other rankings that we've seen around the LPL are just putting them too low. But now that we have covered our, non-playoff teams, it's time to move into number 10 in my power rankings, which is the start of my projected playoff teams. This is big to get into this area, but we still are in the C tier. It's not a tier jump from 11 to 10. Like I said, there are 11 teams that I think I'll expect to be playoff teams. But coming in at number 10, just making the list for me, it's going to be Edward Gaming. EDG coming in pretty low here at number 10, but it's really the highest I can put them considering the complete, unknowns that are the 2 new players coming in. I mean, one of them is relatively known. He's been playing at least a mediocre level for a little while now, but Vampire is a major question mark for this team. We have absolutely no idea what this guy is going to be at an LPL level, and it's going to be interesting. Even if, the top side is obviously very established and, Leave coming back into the team could be really good for them because of how good he was in spring, it still is a pretty big question mark. So let's go ahead and go over it. Their lineup is looking like Ale in the top lane, Jeje in the jungle, Fisher in the mid lane, Leave at AD carry, and Vampire at support. Like I said, some veterans, but a lot of young players on this EDG team. This very much is a new direction. This is very much, I don't want to say a rebuild year for EDG because I don't think that's necessarily fair, but I think they would be okay with not being as dominant as they have been, not guaranteeing their spot at Worlds. I mean, they were one spot away from making it, one series away from making it last year, but I still think they want to compete. Like, I think this team expects to be pretty good, and I think me putting them at 10 is probably on the low level of what their expectations are. They certainly believe that they're going to be a playoff team, but let's go ahead and talk about maybe why I'm a little bit more hesitant on this team and why I think 10 is the perfect spot for them, at least to start the season. We'll start with Ale and Jeje up on the top side. We know what we're getting out of these 2. These are borderline all-pro caliber players at their positions. Ale is pretty volatile. He can have good games, he can have bad games, but generally speaking, last year he was just good. In his first year with EDG, I would expect that to even get better this year. Summer split, a lot kind of went wrong for this team, and while they were a lot better by the end of the split, they took some time to kind of get a little bit more consistent. A lot of the problems that this team ran into was just like synergy between the players and stylistic problems. I think a lot of the players on the team last year were very resource heavy, and I think having a player like Uzi in the roster didn't necessarily help that. I think that will be better this year, and I think Ale is one of the players who will benefit the most from that. I would expect him to return to his post as one of the top 3 top laners in the region. He is one of those guys that you can put on a team and, you know, he can win worlds. You absolutely can win worlds with a player like Ale in the top lane, so you're not worried about that. And you have won worlds with a player like Jeje in the jungle, and so you're certainly not worried about that. Jeje is awesome. Hyper consistent, can play a multitude of different styles, can be your primary carry, can be your primary facilitator. It doesn't really matter. He can kind of do a little bit of everything, and I think that's what's most impressive to me about Jeje and his longevity in the league is just how consistent and how easy it is for him to be one of the best players in the league every single year, basically no matter what. He was still really good last year. He was first team All-Pro for me in, I think, spring. It was either spring or summer. He was one of the first team All-Pro junglers. I remember that because I truly did believe that there was no one. It was first. It was spring split. That's right. He was first team in spring because I truly didn't feel there was any jungler that helped their team out more. Kanavi obviously ended up being better throughout the rest of the year, but Jeje is a top 3 jungler in the LPL. He is amazing and he deserves to be near the top of this list, but everything else on this team is at the very least kind of a question mark. The only other one on this team who's had any experience in the LPL is Leave. He played the entirety of the spring split last year and then the beginning of summer, but obviously there's a lot of controversy surrounding him, not only off the Rift, you know, I'm not going to talk about any of the off the Rift stuff because that's whatever, right? But between teammates, right? He had a burner account talking shit about Jeje all of last year. That was a big reason why this team didn't want to play with him anymore. So to see these two playing on the same team again, it's surprising to say the least, but you know, Lee was awesome in spring. He was easily the best rookie and it wasn't particularly close. And honestly, he was a top, you know, 3 AD carry in the LPL in the spring split. Like he was really, really good. Fell off a lot at the beginning of summer. He was not playing well, but again, as I said in my grades video on him, you never really know what is affecting him as a player. You never really know if, you know, mentally a lot of the accusations and allegations were already going through behind the scenes and that was affecting his play on the Rift. You just never really know. And so, you know, we're going to have to see. It's a wait and see approach on Leave. But again, the last time he played a full split in the LPL, he was really damn good. And he's a player that you can build around, like truly build around. He could be one of the best players in the LPL. And then you've got Fisher. He's really the more known quantity of the rookies that are coming in here for EDG. He's been, you know, prepped to be this team's mid laner for years. Everybody thought it was going to be last year, but they ended up, I guess, not feeling comfortable enough to go to him, so they go to Fofo. Fofo was pretty good for this team, despite what Reddit will tell you. He was definitely a positive for them overall, but, you know, Fisher is the upside pick. It's just he's never really played any consistent time at this high of a level. He's a big prospect coming in from Korea, and, you know, obviously he's been training and training and training in this system. It's his time. It's show up or shut up at this point. Like, I'm not going to give him a big leash because, honestly, he's been a prospect for too long for me to say that, you know, he needs more time. He needs more seasoning. If he doesn't have it by now, then I think that, you know, top-tier mid-lane prospect status has to be gone out the window. But, you know, I think it's very possible that he shows up and is the Rookie of the Year. Like, I know I talked about, you know, a player in Nayu that I think is my favorite rookie. Like, Fisher's going to be on probably a better team than Nayu is, and Fisher, I think, you know, probably will have more resources allocated towards him, so it's going to be interesting, but he's certainly somebody that's going to be in that conversation. I'm not super worried about him. I think he will be fine. The player that I am worried about is Vampire in the support position, not because I think he's bad, but because I don't know what to think of him. This guy has barely played any professional League of Legends. Really, the best shot that we have of looking at EDG is Demacia Cup, and in that competition, Ale and Jeje didn't play, so it's not even like we can get a really good idea of what this team is, you know, at that point. Like, I don't know what this team looks like. But I will say, if the bot side is what they were during, you know, Demacia Cup, if Fisher, Leave, and Vampire are what they were, this team is not going to come in 10th because they were bad. Like, they were really, really bad. They were one of the worst teams at the tournament. They couldn't win a game to save their lives. Again, I know Ale and Jeje weren't there, and they're the 2 best players on this team by a considerable margin, but you would have hoped that Fisher, Leave, and Vampire would have been competent if this is a playoff team. I mean, you know, you would have hoped to see something. You're not seeing anything there. I still want to give them the benefit of the doubt because, again, this is such a young team with some, you know, proven members on the top side that just weren't there for that tournament. But Vampire is not ready. It doesn't feel like he is ready. He was really bad at Demacia Cup. Him and Leave didn't seem to have particularly great synergy. I don't really know. Maybe I'm going to be wrong. Maybe Vampire is going to be better than I'm expecting, but I think the best case scenario for this team is that Fisher ends up really good and Leave gets back to his spring form, and you can kind of hide Vampire. Like, he can just be another piece for this team, you know, the quote-unquote weak link while the rest of the carry roles end up dominating. I think that's your dream, that's your hope for this team, because I just don't know if I see Vampire breaking out as a star support in year one. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe Demacia Cup was just, you know, a fluke, and maybe his lack of competitive experience really at any level is, you know, a sign that they really trust him and that they want to bring him through the system, they want to give him an opportunity, but it's really hard for me to see him as anything other than the number 17th ranked support, the last ranked support, going into the split, because there's just nothing to see of him that is particularly inspiring to put him higher than that. So hopefully I'm wrong, but this EDG team is definitely in more of a rebuild year than they've been in a long time. I mean, 2021 was quote unquote a bit of a rebuild year for them, but they were so good in 2021 that they won Worlds, right? Like, it wasn't a rebuild year. It didn't end up being a rebuild year. They were world champions. And so, you know, I don't know what's going to happen this year. I certainly don't think they're going to be, you know, world champions, but, you know, for Fisher and for Vampire, they have to be good enough. Leave has to get back to that form. Ollie and Jeje, I feel pretty good about, but this is a very volatile team, probably one of the most volatile that EDG has had in the history of their organization. And now moving on to number 9 in the power rankings, and this is going to be the top of the C tier for me. Like I said, C tier are teams that I think are kind of on the borderline of being able to make playoffs. I could see a world in which they definitely don't, especially if they underperform. And honestly, you know, this team has already started off a bit slower than I would have liked, but I trust the talent enough to keep them here at 9. It's, oh my god, it's OMG coming in here at number 9 for me in the power rankings, just above EDG. And this is, you know, a little bit of a vote of confidence that they're going to be able to get it together, because I do like most of the players on this team a lot, but we got to be honest with ourselves. This has not been a good start in Demacia Cup. They did not look very good in that tournament. A lot of these players ended up underperforming, and the player that I'm the most concerned about, which is of course their jungler, didn't exactly do a lot to change my opinion. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go over it. Their lineup is looking like Cube in the top lane, Zhao Feng in the jungle, Angel in the mid lane, Abel at AD carry, and PP God at support. Of course, a lot of turnover on this roster. You see a lot of the players that were here last year going to bigger and stronger teams. Top side of this map is going to Ninjas and Pyjamas, which we will talk about, and the mid lane going to Top Esports, which we'll also talk about later in this video. But Abel and PP God are the two that are being retained from an OMG team that very much overperformed expectations last year. They were a top 4 team in the spring split. They made that second tier of the LPL playoffs, which was really big. Obviously, things didn't end up going their way in summer. You know, some people could have predicted that. You know, it's just a really tough LPL. It's hard to break through there. They didn't end up qualifying for the season finals, but they had so much going for them. This has always been a team that's been very highly talked about on this channel. If you've followed this channel at any point over the past 3 years, OMG has been a team that I bandwagoned on in 2021 and really have not jumped off since, but I think there is reason to believe that they're going to take a couple of steps back this year. Those reasons are not the bot lane. I want to make that abundantly clear. Abel and PP God really took steps up last year. Well, Abel took steps up last year. PP God coming over was the big new addition for OMG that was really supposed to stabilize this team of rookies and make them a contender, and that's basically exactly what he did. Basically everywhere that PP God has gone, he has made every team that he has played for better. Specifically, obviously, you know, Victory 5 and that organization, but you know, he's just a calming presence, a stabilization down in the bot lane, and he makes every AD carry a lot better. Photic is a great example of a player who has looked so much different with and without PP God in the bot lane. I think it's amazing that you're able to bring him back, and I think it's great that you're able to keep him with Abel on this team. Abel is a really talented AD carry. I've kind of talked about him for a while, I should say, on this channel as somebody that, you know, I'm waiting to see if he was going to take that next major step, because he's super aggressive, and one thing you can't say about Abel is that he's not mechanically talented. He might be the single most mechanically talented AD carry in the LPL when he's playing well, but he can have some mental lapses every now and then. There are going to be games where he's just out of position, or when he takes trades or fights that aren't necessarily beneficial to him. He's just going to have those moments every once in a while, and you live with that because of just how talented and how good he is as a player. But, you know, he really showed a lot of, I guess, improvement in that area last year, a lot of consistency upgrades last year in the LPL. A lot of that I attribute to PP God coming in and just being a really good shot caller, being somebody who is basically, like I said, always made his AD carries look a little bit better, look a little bit more consistent, but you've got to give Abel that credit as well. Together, they are definitely one of the best duos in the LPL. They are going to be able to compete with any team on any given day. That's the kind of talent you have in the bot lane, so obviously, it's really great that they were able to bring them back. And then you're bringing 2 veterans in the solo lanes here, starting with Angel in the mid lane, and I'm going to be honest, my opinion of Angel almost completely changed in the summer split of last year. I'm never really been a big Angel fan on this channel's history. I really wasn't a big fan of him on Suning, even when they went to World Finals. I always thought he was just a good player, you know, a facilitator, but somebody who I think would look worse if there were worse players around him. And then he goes over to RNG, you know, in spring of last year, and he can't even hold a starting job over Tong Yuan. He really was not very good. Tong Yuan was also not very good in that circumstance. Both of them were pretty bad in spring, and then it's like, Angel's really fallen off. You know, he's not on teams that are going to be able to, you know, highlight his strengths anymore. It's okay. He goes over to Ninjas in Pyjamas, who were really struggling, and they really needed to find a competent mid laner at all. And you know what? He shows up on NIP, and he's one of the best mid laners in the LPL last year. And, you know, it just is what it is. Angel was genuinely phenomenal in the summer split. I would certainly argue it was the best split of his entire career. And if he's going to play like that here for OMG, it's a complete game changer. It just completely changes the perception of this team, because that is a carry that you can supplement Abel with. Obviously, Abel can be your primary guy, but you need somebody else that can take attention and stress and prio away from Abel so that he's not constantly getting put in positions where he has to play safe in a 3v2 or a 4v2 or constantly worry about these bot lane dives. Angel is absolutely good enough to be able to pull that pressure away from Abel. So I think that signing is really good, but again, it really is just going off of the summer split that I have Angel ranked this high. If you're going off of the rest of his career, I don't know if he's a top 8 mid laner right now in the LPL, because that mid lane is just so stacked. It really is that good, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that what we saw last year was, you know, replicable in some way, and I'm going to continue to rank Angel high for now. And then you're bringing Cube into the top lane. I'm somewhere in the middle on Cube. I've loved Cube in the past, somebody who I've really gone to bat for on Rare Atom back, you know, the last couple of years, but I gotta be honest, 2023, kind of the opposite of Angel, was absolutely a down year for Cube. He was really not good on Rare Atom in the spring split. They end up shipping him off to WE. You know, you really hope that a change of pace, a better team around him is gonna make him a little bit more consistent, because he just was losing lane a lot more than he had in previous years on Rare Atom, but that was not the case. He was still very inconsistent in lane. He was a bit better, I certainly want to say that, in the summer split, but you know, Cube is not a star anymore, in my opinion, or at least he wasn't last year, and so you're hoping that that stability that Cube really was known for the past couple of years can come back here. I just don't know if that's going to happen on a team that is pretty volatile. Like, Angel's pretty volatile, Abel is certainly very volatile, and Jungle's a very volatile position, which we will get to. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see which version of Cube. That's why I say I'm kind of in the middle, because I still trust Cube to be a good starter, a good starting top laner in the LPL. I just don't know if he's the same guy he was in 2022 that people tend to remember. I think we might be seeing a different version of him, which is why he comes in at number 8 and not a bit higher for me. And then we've got Zhao Feng in the jungle, and this is really where the conversation ends up becoming interesting for me, because I don't really know what they saw in Zhao Feng. He's played very little at the LDL level. You know, a couple of players, you know, getting brought into some prominent positions here that have played very little in the LDL. He was essentially Neyu's backup. We talked about Rare Atom. He was the backup for top esports challengers this past year in the jungle. Got a bit of playing time every once in a while because clearly they wanted to prioritize him, but he didn't look like he was exceptional. He just looked kind of okay, and I would have liked to see him actually take a full split in the LDL as a starter to see what he could really do, but he gets the call up here to OMG. They're really putting a lot of pressure on him very early on, and you just have to hope that he's going to be good enough to be able to justify that. I'm really not sure that he is going to be. He's going to come in as my number 17th ranked jungler, my last ranked jungler going into the year, because I just have no idea what this guy is going to offer. I really wouldn't expect him to be, you know, especially what Aki was for this team last year, which is one of the best junglers in the league, but certainly, you know, you can hope that he can be a top half jungler because there is enough talent around him to make that work, but Demacia Cup definitely scared me off. He was not good at that tournament. Neither was Cube and neither was Angel, and so, you know, there are some concerns there. You know, synergy is going to be a big deal with this team, but overall, there's just this sinking suspicion for me that this is the group of veterans that seems to appear every year in the LPL that just doesn't work, right? Every year we get this team of, you know, good players that can't really turn into a great team, and I'm worried that that's going to be OMG, especially after what they showed in their first tournament as a group. I hope I'm wrong, because again, talent-wise, this is actually a pretty good team, a team that you might even rank higher in certain circumstances, but Abel and PP God have to be one of the better bot lanes again in the league, maybe even with less pressure on the top side of the map. Cube needs to be the better version of himself. Angel needs to repeat what he did in summer, and Zhao Feng needs to be a solid jungler at this level. Maybe not a star, but a solid jungler. All of those things do have to go right for you to be competing at the same level you were last year, which is a borderline top 4 to 6 team in the LPL. That's a lot to ask. I think there is, you know, expectation for some regression, but at least for me, I just don't feel comfortable moving them out of the playoff spots right now. A lot of people are going to put Rare Rare Atom in their top 10, and I definitely played around with putting Rare Atom in my top 10 because of how much better they were at Demacia Cup than a team like OMG, but until, we see more than just best of ones out of this team, I'm going to at least, lean on the talent grade that I've been giving this team a little bit more and, expect to see them somewhere near the top 10. And now moving on to number 8 in these power rankings, and this is another tier jump for me. We're going from the C tier teams that, really I think expect to make playoffs, but I wouldn't be shocked if they just weren't as good as maybe we thought. They have some massive question mark somewhere and, are maybe not as consistent as maybe the teams above them, right? But now we're going into the B tier, and B tier for me are teams that absolutely expect to make playoffs, but personally, I would be surprised if these were Worlds teams. I do think that a lot of these teams have pretty high expectations of themselves, and I think all of them think they can make Worlds if things go right, but to me, these are the teams that are just on the outside of that. And kicking that off at number 8 for me, it is going to be Team WE. I think this is a pretty fair place to place this team. I'm very high on these players individually. It's kind of like what we just talked about with OMG, except I think WE is just a slightly better version of it with slightly more upside in terms of the players that you have brought in because, while I think, Abel and PP God and Cube and Angel are all good players, I don't know if I trust any of them to be like an MVP. I think there is a player on this team that could potentially turn into an MVP if things go right. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Wayward in the top lane, Hang in the jungle, Fofo in the mid lane, Prince at AD carry, and Iwandi at support. Obviously, WE was a team that really started to revitalize their image last year. One of the most historic organizations in the LPL, in Chinese League of Legends. They really had not had a good go of things since the 2020s ended up starting, but 2023, one of their more successful years, they ended up making the playoffs in the summer split, which is obviously huge. This team really needed to be able to get themselves back on track, and they were able to do that. So, congratulations to them, but that's not their goal. That's not what they wanted. They want to be a true contender here in the LPL. They want to be a team that has the potential to go to Worlds, and while, like I said, I don't necessarily expect them to be able to, I think this roster definitely has some more upside than any of the rosters that they've had in years past. You're bringing back 2 players from 2023. Now, they're not game breakers. Wandi's the first one I want to talk about in the support position. He's going to come in as my number 10 support. He's a good support. I know I've said that for a lot of different supports at the LPL level, but honestly, most LPL supports are good players. They're not game breakers. They're not dominating. The top 3, top 4 guys really feel like game changers, and then everybody else just feels kind of solid. You're not going to worry too much about having a Wandi. You can win with him, but I also don't think he is this, amazing player. In the past, we've seen him get benched on certain teams, and, the fan base crying out that he deserves to start. He is this amazing player. He's fine. He's good. I don't think he's great, or at least I wouldn't expect him to be great here in 2024. I think this bot lane has the potential to be amazing, but I attribute a lot of that to the AD carry, which we will get to in a bit, but Hang is the other player that is coming back here for WE. And Hang, I think, is significantly more exciting from a, long-term perspective kind of angle. I thought Hang actually had a really interesting rookie year last year. Came into the league, had his problems, certainly had his style of game that he liked to play, and he never exactly broke that style. For those of you who didn't watch Hang, he was a player who thrived at being able to win early, was very aggressive, knew exactly how to get advantages in the early game. His pathing was pretty immaculate at the start of games, but his mid-game was just about the weakest in the entire league. He did a really bad job of transitioning leads into effective advantages for the team as a whole, at least especially at the beginning of Spring Split and throughout the early part of the year. He did get a bit better at that. I think he got a lot more comfortable playing with the rest of his team, but, this is a very talented jungler, somebody who is, quite frankly, ridiculously adept at being good in the early game and generating leads, and that's probably the most important part of playing jungle in the current, game of League of Legends is, getting leads early and being able to translate that to your lanes. If he's gotten a little bit more consistent at being able to transition those leads into more effective late game advantages, he could be one of the more dangerous junglers in the league. He absolutely has the talent to do so, so I understand why you would want to bring him back. He's a very interesting prospect, but he does rank rather low on my jungle rankings, coming in at number 11 because, again, he's just not a complete player at this moment. Perhaps he can turn into one, and honestly, I would expect him to continue to grow as a player. I like him a bit, but just from what we've seen so far, I have to rank him a little bit lower just because that's where he was last year, in my opinion. But you're bringing in 3 very very experienced players in the other three roles. We've already kind of talked about him, so let's go to him. Let's talk about Prince coming in here for WE, obviously coming back from the LCS, this time in the LPL. We talked about Vikla a bit earlier for Rare Adam and why I would expect him to have a pretty big bounce back split. Everything I said about Vikla can be copied and pasted towards Prince, except I think Prince is just better than that. Like, I think Prince at his best is a top 5 AD carry in the world. He's got that kind of talent. For WE to be able to bring him in here, he could be a complete game changer for this roster and for this organization. That's what he was for Sandbox before he went to North America, before he went to the LCS. He was the runner-up to the MVP in 2022 summer. Very narrowly got that Sandbox team with really not a lot of talent to Worlds, which would have been incredibly impressive, but, ended up going to North America, and honestly, I still sing this guy's praises for what he was able to do in NA. He was my Spring Split MVP. Obviously, didn't win it, on broadcast. They gave it to Berserker, but Prince, to me, was the most valuable player to his team in the Spring Split. Things fell off the wheels in summer, but he was still pretty good, and I think a lot of that just ended up being mental for him, but talent-wise, coming to a league where I think his playstyle and his, mentality around the game is really going to excel, that aggressive style that he has as an AD carry. If Prince is a top 2, top 3 AD carry in the LPL this year, is really anybody going to be that surprised? I'm certainly not. Like, that's really where this team's upside comes in and why they're in the tier above the C tier. I don't think this team necessarily has, like, Worlds upside, but it could have Worlds upside if Prince ends up being an MVP caliber player for this team, and that's really going to change a lot of things, because I think the rest of this team is good enough to be able to support that. But Prince, if he can get back to his form that he had in 2022 in the LCK, this is a massive signing for a WE team that's been looking for a superstar for quite a while. You're also bringing in Fofo in the mid lane. This is a player who I think gets a lot more hate in-game, I should say, than he deserves. Off the rift, I'm not really going to defend him, obviously, but he was really good last year, I think, for EDG. Wasn't good in every single game and was a bit one-tricky when it came to the Jace. That certainly was something that he looked a lot better on than a lot of other champions, but this is a player who's been very good and in the mid lane role for a lot of different teams for a long time. Going back to the PCS, he was one of the best mid laners in the PCS to get imported here in the first place. He goes over to a team like Rare Adam, and people forget about that Rare Adam team that almost made Worlds, that got 3rd place in the LPL regular season when it was basically just Fofo and Leon, like, trying their best on that roster. Fofo was really the hard carry. He was an all-pro caliber guy there, and I thought he was pretty good last year for EDG, especially in the Spring Split. I think things did get a bit worse in summer, but I would expect Fofo to be an upper-tier mid laner, because that's just kind of what he has been on the Rift for the entirety of his career. Maybe he's not a superstar, maybe he's not the kind of guy you want to play towards in big games like the playoffs, but I certainly think he's good enough for you to be able to win with him. And then it's similar with Wayward in the top lane. I compared Wayward to a player like Morgan. I actually think they have very similar stories. Both of them spent a lot of their early parts of their careers on really good teams, and they just weren't necessarily good enough for that. Wayward's a good top laner, and Morgan was a good top laner, but those players had ridiculous expectations because they were asked to play with some of the best players in the world on some of the best teams in the world, and therefore fan bases turned on them very quickly because they just weren't able to live up to that standard. But now that I think a lot of expectations are off of Wayward, he goes to a team that, maybe is a little bit closer to the skill level that he might be around. I would expect him to actually be a pretty good top laner, because honestly, he is a pretty good top laner. He's not going to win every game. He's going to have some losses, and certainly I'm not going to deny that, but the truth of it was that Wayward won more than he lost on top esports. People just like to focus on the losses because they're more consequential towards the team overall. I don't think it's going to be the same thing here on WE. I think this could be a really nice situation for him because I think it's a really good team around him, a good enough team for you to be able to compete, but not this kind of major expectation team where you're going to be looked at as a liability if you're just a good player. This is going to be a really nice spot for Wayward, and a spot where I really do think he's going to bounce back as one of the more interesting top laners in the league. And if you can see what I'm talking about with this team, you can see why they rank a little bit higher. They come in at number 8. They were originally at number 7 for me, but, like I said, it's mostly because just one team ended up moving up higher due to being really good at Demacia Cup. But I still really believe in this WE team. They're in the B tier for a reason, a team that, theoretically could make Worlds if everything goes right, but I would expect this team to lock in playoffs pretty early, be clearly one of the 8 best teams in the league, and have a pretty high potential if everything goes right with players like Prince and Fofo. And now moving on to number 7 in the power rankings, and this one is certainly going to cause at least some conversation, I believe, probably down in the comments section, but coming in at number 7 for me, it's one of the world finalists from this past year. It's Weibo Gaming, and I know that's pretty low, a team, in the B tier, and I'll be honest, this team was originally a lot higher. They were 5th in my power rankings before Demacia Cup, but I'm a bit scared of this team, not because I think their Demacia Cup performance was all terrible, was all bad, but first of all, there was a team that just just simply had to go above them because of Demacia Cup, and there was really not a lot I could do about that. But also, I do think there is a world in which this team just booms. I think there's a realistic case to be made that this is the same exact team from last year in a league that got significantly better over the offseason, or at least the top end got significantly deeper over the offseason, and I think that is a concern. Perhaps there's some regression coming in from some of the older players. I do like some of these players more than the average analyst on this roster, but I gotta be honest, I don't know if they're going to repeat as a Worlds team going into 2024. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like ZDZ in the top lane, Xiao Hao in the jungle, Xiao Hu in the mid lane, Light at AD carry, and Crisp at support. Of course, 3 of the 5 members returning here, bot side of the map, all coming back, all having made World Finals this past year, Xiao Hu, Light, and Crisp. We'll talk about the bot lane first because they are the duo that is returning. I really like these two. I'm a big fan of these two. I thought they were the best part of Weibo Gaming last year over the course of the entire year. You know, Light coming in a bit lower than Xiao Hu and Crisp, but that's only because I think AD carry is a bit more stacked at the high level. Top 4 ADCs can go in any order you want, and I think Light is pretty locked in at number 5 for me. He's better than everybody else, but I don't know if you can say that he's better than any of the players in the top 4 with a straight face. So he ends up kind of locking himself in at the number 5 spot. Still think he's obviously a really good player. What Light offers that I think is really valuable in the LPL is just consistency. You don't really see that out of a lot of other AD carries. I think that's what made Ruler so special last year, was just how consistent from game to game to game he was for LGD Gaming. And in a league that's so volatile, in a league that has so many different outcomes and any team can win or lose, and especially on a team and an org that is pretty known for being very volatile, for Light to be probably the most stabilizing AD carry that you can get in the LPL, that's a really nice thing to have, and I think he's a really big asset to this team. And don't take me saying that he's consistent and stable as me saying he's just good. He's really good. Like, mechanically speaking, he can carry you into a world spot. He really is like that kind of AD carry. He's a world-class AD carry. I don't know if he's as good as maybe the best of the best in the world, which there are 4 of in the LPL in my opinion, but he's pretty darn close, which is why he comes in pretty high on this list. And then Crisp is his partner, and, you know, like I said a lot of last year, for my money, in the regular season at the very least, Crisp was the most valuable player to this Weibo team. I think his contributions often went pretty undervalued by a lot of other media analysts, and he did not have a good World Championships. That is definitely something to talk about. First of all, he was a lot better in the bracket stage than he was in the Swiss stage. Swiss was a bit of a problem for him just in general, but bracket stage was actually really good for him. He played really well on their run to the World Finals, and I think that kind of went under the radar. Him and Light both had a really good run, but, you know, I can understand why there was some concern surrounding Crisp, but I think them bringing him back here is a must. He is reportedly the primary shot caller for how this team wants to play the game. He can play super aggro. He can be very good in lane. He can move around and do roams. Very versatile player. Works really well with Light. This was very sneakily one of the best bot lanes in the world last year, and it's really good to see them reunited in 2024. And then you're also bringing back Xiao Hu in the mid lane. Obviously, I don't need to tell you how good Xiao Hu is. This guy is a legend in the LPL, one of the greatest Chinese League of Legends players of all time, and that has been proven over and over again. He finally got to make a Worlds Finals this past year on Weibo. Obviously didn't get to hoist that trophy, but this is somebody who has consistently been one of the best in his position for a while. I think some people are a little bit lower on him as a player, but the truth of the matter is that he is maybe the best, I guess, team fighting mid laner in the world, right? His early games can sometimes be a little passive. They can sometimes even be a little bit inconsistent. He's honestly not the most consistent laner in the entire world, but if you need to rely on somebody to play something like a Azir and just scale into the late game and win you a team fight, it's Xiao Hu. I talked about a player in Larson over in the LEC that I value highly because you kind of know what you're going to get out of him from game to game. Xiao Hu's a bit more inconsistent, but his highs are so much higher, and he's kind of that archetype of player for those of you who might be a bit more familiar with the LEC. Xiao Hu is a very big positive to have here, still comes in as one of the most valuable mid laners in the entire region. So you're looking at that and you're like, why is this team so low? Why do you not believe in this team? Well, it's not the jungle position, because if you've been following my channel for any amount of time, specifically the last 2 years, Xiao Hao might be the biggest channel darling. Like, I know Zeka probably has that title over in the LCK, but Xiao Hao might be the #1 player that I've gone to bat for and just, like, claimed is the guy I'm cheering for over and over and over again. I think Xiao Hao is one of the best junglers in the world at the current moment. I think he was mega elo held on anyone's legend over the last couple of years, and for him to finally get on an organization that has world's caliber talent around him, I mean, theoretically, he could have an MVP caliber year. I certainly think that's in the realm of possibility possibilities for Weibo is that he could just be the best jungler in the league, be the best player on this team. He's carry-oriented. I think he'll fit really well with a lot of the rest of these players, but he hasn't really ever done it at a high level, right? He's only played for bad teams over the course of his LPL career. He's never had a chance to even play in the playoffs, and so it all is projection. This guy has been very good at a very low level of, I guess it's a high level of competition, but at a very low level of stakes over the last couple of years. I'm very excited to see what he's finally going to get to do now that he has an opportunity, and I think this season really does kind of hinge on Xiaohao and whether or not he's going to be as good as I think he's going to be. If he is going to be as good, this is absolutely, it has the potential to be a Worlds team, like a top 4, top 3 team, even if everything else that I don't think might go right ends up going wrong. I think Xiaohao can be that good, but we're going to have to see it. Love the player, but, it's going to be a big year, make or break year in 2024 for him. And then the more interesting part is going to be ZDZ on the top lane for me. Obviously, we're placing The Shy, who, is a very famous, very highly regarded top laner. Hasn't always been the most consistent player in the entire world, as anybody who's watched the LPL will know, but he was amazing at Worlds. One of the best players at a tournament that really mattered. But in terms of regular season performances, maybe you're expecting ZDZ to actually be a more consistent from game to game, be more of a positive over the course of an entire season. I certainly think that conversation is possible. But the truth is that ZDZ isn't half the upside of The Shy, right? You're never going to get those games where he just takes over in that same way. I compared ZDZ to a player like Cube for a while, and similar to Cube, ZDZ actually had the worst year of his career in 2023 for me. AL fell apart, and a lot of that was ZDZ just getting destroyed in every matchup on the top side. Even winning matchups weren't exactly winning matchups for AL, and so, yeah, I'm a bit concerned because he has some longevity in the league, and because, this team clearly wanted to bring him on. I'm sure Xiaohao vouched for him, and because I've been high on ZDZ in the past, I did rank him still relatively high at number 13, but he was not the 13th best top laner in the LPL last year. He just wasn't. This is a bit of a projection, and that's a concern. And even outside of that, like I said, this is a team that you could argue got worse over the course of the offseason, with The Shy being swapped out for ZDZ, and Weibo Xiaohao, in my opinion, being an upgrade, but a lot of people seeing it as a side grade. And the LPL got better at the top, and that's not really arguable. All the teams in the LPL, I think, are stronger this year than they were last year, most of the teams at the top of the standings, and that means Weibo has the potential to drop down. Add on to the fact that this team was kind of a surprise at the end of the year to even get to Worlds in the first place anyways, and, I think regression is definitely possible. Somewhere between 5 and 7 is where I would expect this team and this roster, but again, because I really wasn't sold by their, quite frankly, limited performance in Demacia Cup, they really didn't get to do a whole ton, but because I wasn't super sold that I love the way this team was playing, I'm just going to rank them at 7 to start the year and be willing to move them up if they start hotter than I expect. And now moving on to our top 6 teams. Of course, we're still in the B tier, but these are teams that I really do think, if everything goes right, could be Worlds teams this year. I know it's a little bit rich to say that about, this team in 6th place, but even this team, I think things could go right enough for them to be able to compete for it. Coming in at number 6 after a very good Demacia Cup, it's Ninjas in Pyjamas. They are going to come in just a bit higher than Weibo, and that's because they beat Weibo at Demacia Cup. I simply couldn't put them below them because, honestly, they were just the better team at Demacia Cup than Weibo were, and right now I think NIP is better than they are, and that's a lot to do with the top side of this map. I think the top side of this map is a Worlds top side, one of the best in the entire region. If this team is going to have problems, in my opinion, it's going to be because of how inconsistent this bot lane is going to be. Of course, I'm not the biggest fan of this bot lane. I've talked about it. I'm giving them some leniency in terms of the grades that I'm giving them, but this is really the last chance for them as a duo, in my opinion, in Spring Split. But let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Shanji in the top lane, Aki in the jungle, Rookie in the mid lane, Photic at AD carry, and Zhuo at support. The two members coming back are the two players that I am the most concerned about, Photic and Zhuo in the bot lane here. They were both pretty bad last year. I mean, Zhuo had moments where he looked good. There were a couple of, engager games once we started getting towards the back half of summer where it was like, oh, he definitely looks a lot more comfortable on these types of champions. But for the most part, last year, this was like a bottom 3, bottom 4 bot lane in the LPL. They were really not good. Photic was single-handedly losing games for NIP, and there was a high probability that if this team didn't end up making playoffs, it was because this bot lane just simply wasn't good enough. For them to be the only two players that are returning here, it's certainly a decision, but clearly, some of the players on this team wanted to play with Photic again. Rookie, coming back to this organization, probably wanted to play with Photic again like he did in 2022. Zhuo is somebody who has, been wanting to play with Photic. Those two are friends. They've played together in developmental or in the LDL before, in Tier 2 before, and so they want to play together, but again, I just don't have a lot of faith in these two. Photic graded out as the least valuable player in the LPL by all my metrics last year because his team was really good and he was really bad. Like, it was staggering how much worse his team was because he was on it. Now, to say that that year is repeatable, I'm not going to say that he's exactly going to be that player in 2024 because he was a lot better than that in 2022. But even in 2022, I got a lot of flack for this on the channel. But I was talking about how Photic was basically in the dream situation and that I really think that the performances that he was putting out were not sustainable, that he was not going to be that kind of player for the entirety of his career. I had a lot of people who were telling me that Photic was a top 580 carry in the world or even just in the LPL, and I just couldn't say that. That was too rich for me. Not to, pat my own back or toot my own horn at all, but, I'd like to think I have a good idea of, 80 carry analysis. That's the position I seem to get right the most often, and Photic just never screamed superstar to me. Maybe he can turn it around, maybe he can be a league average 80 carry, and that's kind of what you're hoping for here. I have him ranked as such as about an 11th in terms of the rankings, but he could be a lot lower than this. He could be a lot higher than this. The last time he played with Rookie, he was better than this, but he has to be better than this. That's kind of the point I'm making. And then, like I said, for Zhuo, I honestly trust him a bit more. I think as a player individually, he's got more strengths, but his highs are so much lower than Photic's, right? Like, he's never really been a really good support at this level. Photic at least has had a good year at the LPL level before, whereas Zhuo's just kind of been bleh wherever he's gone. He was not very good for TES no matter how many chances they gave him, and he came over here and was just kind of fine. I mean, the spot lane lost a lot, isolated 2v2. I just don't really see this as being a strength, and they were not good at Demacia Cup, even though this team was solid. The top side really was that strong. I would still expect NIP to be contenders, even if they're not good, but if they are good, that really changes the entire outlook of this team. But let's talk about the parts of the team that I actually do like. Rookie was one of the first big pieces to come back here to NIP, and he was really the one that sparked this becoming a lot more of a competitive roster. Rookie obviously is a legend in the LPL, a world champion on Invictus Gaming in 2018. Not exactly the player that has been himself over the past few years. 2023 was not a great year, to be entirely honest, for Rookie. Top Esports had a lot of problems, but I think you could make a genuine argument he was the worst player on that team last year. I trust that that was just a stylistic thing. He made the decision to come back to this organization, this roster that he played for in 2022. He obviously, wanted to be here because he came back before he even knew who he was going to play with, reportedly. And so if he wants to be here, if he wants to play with Photic, if he thinks he can get the best out of anybody, if he feels comfortable and happy in this organization, that will probably bring out the best version of him. And honestly, he was awesome at Demacia Cup. He was a big reason why they ended up beating Weibo, was because Rookie just kind of popped off at that tournament. I could see an amazing year upcoming, but I have to, rank him somewhere in the middle of where I think he will land, which is as a really good mid laner and where he was last year. So he comes in number 5 in my mid lane rankings. And then the top side of the map from OMG ends up coming over, the team that ended up, overperforming expectations. Everybody's except for mine last year when I had them 6th in my preseason power rankings. But Shanji and Aki are coming over. Shanji is an elite level top laner. There are a couple, I should say, good top laners in the LPL, like really elite top laners, but Shanji is absolutely one of them for my money. He is just a really, really good player. Really like watching him play. Can be aggressive, definitely has his own champion pool of things like the Shyvana and things like the Rumble that he's a bit more well known for, but he's very versatile as a player. He's certainly not someone that you feel comfortable banning out or anything like that. In my opinion, he is one of the most dangerous top laners to play against in the entire league, and he's a major asset to have. And you're bringing over Aki in the jungle as well, and you want to talk about somebody who completely broke out in 2023. For me, Aki always was the player on OMG that I was the least excited about. You had a bunch of these carries. You had Shanji, you had Cream, you had Abel, you had these players that all had major upside, and I never really thought Aki was going to be on the same level as them, but I think you can make a strong argument that Aki was actually the best player on OMG in 2023, at least over the course of the entire year. He certainly was in the spring split. He's just a super versatile and consistent jungler. He gets his laners ahead super consistently, and to me, he's one of the more valuable junglers in the entire league. This is a great pickup, and him and Rookie seem to very quickly have very good chemistry, or at least they did in Demacia Cup. I would expect this team to actually be very scary, mostly because of playing through topside and playing through these really strong solo laners. I think that alone is going to make you a Worlds contender, because I really do believe in the top 3 of this map. If the bot lane is competent, if they're just league average, if they can just survive without a ton of resources on that side of the map, I think this absolutely could be a Worlds team. But again, the reason they come in below some of the other teams in the top 5 is because that is a pretty big ask and it's the reason why I don't think they're a Worlds team. It's just I don't think this bot lane is good enough for them to be able to beat the best teams in the league, but this top side absolutely is, and so it's a very interesting conversation to have. Like you can see, they actually went up 2 spots from 8th to 6th because of that Demacia Cup performance, but this is a very interesting team with a lot of interesting players, but because I like this top side so much, I really can't put them any lower than what I have them in here. And that's going to bring us to our top 5 teams. And I think a lot of people have this as the top 5, but for me, we're still in the B tier. I still think the final team to talk about here that I really would be surprised if they were a genuine Worlds contender is number 5 for me, and that's going to be Royal Never Give Up, RNG, coming in at the top of B tier at number 5. This team has some pretty big problems for me, as you can see from the rankings. Generally speaking, I'm lower on the players on this team, but I can't deny that I think they're one of the teams that I expect to be more consistent than maybe some of the others that we're going to see in the LPL. Teams like NIP, you know, they have some pretty big issues that I consider bigger than RNG. A team like WE might not have, you know, bad players, but they're certainly not the top-end players that I think RNG also has. Their best is not the best. You know, I think Weibo certainly has more concerns. I think RNG is clearly the most, you know, consistent, the highest floor of those teams, but I still can't in good conscience say that they're on the same level, in my opinion, as the top 4 teams in the region. And I already know that some of these player rankings are going to make people upset. You know, these player rankings have made people upset in the past. Specific players on this team have already made people upset in the past. But I'm gonna explain it, and I just ask that you listen first and foremost. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Breathe in the top lane, Wei in the jungle, Tongyuan in the mid lane, LWX at AD carry, and Ming at support. We're gonna start with the ones that are the most controversial because I think you guys want to hear about that. I want to say, like, as a preface, and I probably should have said this in one of the introductions, like some of the housekeeping sections, but you know, it's all well and good for you to type that X player should be higher in my comment section. I'm sure I've already gotten a couple comments where it's like, I can't believe X player is number this. That's ridiculous. But I think it would be more helpful to me if you told me the players that are above them that you don't think should be above them. I mean, it's all well and good for me to say that I wish X player was a top 5 jungler in the league, but if there are 5 junglers better than them, then okay, yeah, sorry, like I can't go about that, right? There can't be 7 top 5 junglers in the league, and so we'll start with LWX, because that's the grade that I think people are going to be the most frustrated by, probably in the whole video, if I had to anticipate. And I'll just be honest, I'm lower on LWX. I loved LWX back in the day. 2021 was really good from him, and obviously, you know, go back to 2019, 2020, those were all really good years for him on FPX. But starting in 2022 summer, really, like 2022 spring was still really good for him. Starting in 2022 summer, it was like, we're really starting to see him not be as aggressive. He's losing lane a lot more consistently, even in generally good matchups. It just doesn't feel like mentally he's as there, and I chalked that up to just variance. His team was kind of bad at the end of 2022, so I said, okay, 2023 is going to be better. Then he comes back out for 2023, and he's worse in spring. He's even worse than he was at the end of 2022, and it's like, okay, that's not a good trajectory. And then in summer, he's just as bad, and it's like, oh, this is really starting to concern me. LWX has not been a good League of Legends player in about a year and a half, and that's okay. I expect him, honestly, to be better coming over to RNG here. I think the situation is obviously much better. I think the organization that he plays for is significantly better at making talent good. He gets to play with one of the best supports in the entire world. There's a lot of reasons why I believe that it will go better for LWX, but it would not be right for me to not rank him number 13 at the start of the year, because that's kind of what he has been over the past year and a half in the LPL. Again, I know people are going to argue this because I see takes on Reddit all the time about how, you know, LWX was really stuck, but I did these weekly reviews every single week all year long for the last 2 years, and I gotta tell you, man, LWX just has not been very good at the LPL level. I hope he's better this year, but the floor is somewhere closer to number 13. And then you've got Tongyuan coming in pretty low at 14. I think this is less controversial. He just hasn't broken out yet at the LPL level. He's had good games, but he really has not put together a good split up until this point. He was miserable in spring of last year, clearly, in my opinion, you know, one of the worst mid laners in the LPL. I can't say the worst because players like Dream and Forge were getting regular time in spring split, but you know, Tongyuan was really, really bad for RNG, so much so that even though this team wanted to start him so bad, they had to keep going back to Angel because he just wasn't good enough to play. They gave him the starting spot in full in summer, and he certainly was better. I want to make that clear. He definitely was a lot more consistent, especially towards the middle of the split, but man, his bad games were absolutely still there, and for a team that I think wants to make Worlds this year, or at least has the expectation of being a contender for Worlds this year, I don't know if Tongyuan is good enough in the mid lane right now to justify that. He's going to have to take some major leaps forward forward in order for me to feel good. But that's really where all the negatives kind of come from for RNG. I think everybody else in this team is somebody that I'm very excited about. You're bringing back the top side here. Wei comes in a little bit lower than maybe you'll see him on other rankings. He comes in at number 8 for me. I think part of that is just that jungle is really good at the LPL level, and there are very few junglers that I feel good about putting below Wei, just that I've put above him, because I think those players are really good. But Wei also kind of had a down year last year. There was a reason this team was 500 in both splits, and it's because I really don't think either, I don't think anybody on this team really played up to their standards, if I'm being honest, throughout last year, with the exception of Gala in the spring split. I think summer was just kind of weird for this team. Breathe played well, we'll get to him, but, I think Wei definitely had a little bit of a down year. He was better in spring than he was in summer, but he was really bad in summer, and so you're really hoping he can turn that around again. Not that he had all bad games, he had good games, but it was the consistency, it was the game to game. If you can have one really good game, but if it comes at the cost of 3 really bad games, then I'm not really sure that that's worth it if you're a team that wants to go to Worlds. So I need to see him get back to the form that he was at before last year, very similar to what I've said about LWX. And then you have Breathe in the top lane. Breathe I feel a lot more confident in. This is a player that generally would be higher on these rankings because I really do value Breathe very heavily, but top lane's really good, man. Like, it's just hard to break into the top 3 or top 4 in the top lane right now. But 5 is still very prestigious. Top 5 in the top lane in the LPL is really good, and Breathe's a really good player. Maybe he's not a superstar, but he can carry games. You can put him on carries, put a lot of resources into him, and he will win you games. You can play him weak side, where he's probably a bit more comfortable, and he's going to be very stable. He's just going to be a really good player, and he's one of the best top laners in the world. I have no problems, no concerns at all with Breathe. And then Ming is returning here. There were rumors, obviously, he was going to top esports both in the middle of the year last year and in the offseason, but nope, he wants to stay in this organization. He wants to continue playing for RNG. And I get it. I think LWX and Ming is going to be a really fun bot lane if LWX can get his confidence back, and that's really what I'm hoping. Ming really does come in as one of the best supports in the world for me already. He comes in at number 3, only behind 2 players that were just unbelievable last year, and he should come in and be one of the best supports in the league. He basically has been his entire career. He was so good in spring when he did actually play for this team with Gala, and those two really were awesome, and he's just a rock. I really wouldn't expect anything other than him being an all-pro caliber support, and that's why I said I actually do expect LWX to have a bounce back year, because playing with Ming will do that for you. It will make your life a lot easier, and it will make your job a lot easier, and that's kind of what I'm expecting, and why RNG does come into the top 5 for me. Like I said, still not sold on this team being a Worlds team, because mostly I'm a bit worried about mid lane. I just don't know if it's going to be good enough for you to go up against the top 4 teams in the LPL right now. If Tongyuan can take that step up, though, hopefully LWX can have that bounce back year, getting to play with Ming, getting more stability around him in the organization. Hopefully Wei can get back to his pre-2023 form, where he was one of the best junglers in the world, and Breathe continues to be a rock on the top side. All of those things are super possible for this team, which is to me why they come in at number 5, but there are just a few too many, outstanding concerns that, lead me to say that I'm not going to just give them that spot. I need to see them earn it before I put them in the top 4. And now we get to move on to the top 4 teams. And obviously, top 4 is pretty important in the LPL. 4 teams go to Worlds at the end of the year, but this is more of a spring power ranking. So at the end of the day, top 2 is still the most important thing, but this is a tier jump for me. We're going from the B tier to the A tier. We talked about B tier being teams that really expect to make playoffs. It would be kind of a surprise if they didn't make playoffs, but, probably aren't, Worlds teams. Probably aren't going to be competing to go to MSI, or be in the finals or anything like that, at least in my opinion at the beginning of the split. Whereas now that we're in the A tier, these are teams that I think really expect to at least be in the conversation. They're maybe not the favorites to win the split like the top 2 are, in my opinion, but 3 and 4 are both teams talented enough to be able to win the LPL and win Worlds and, get very far if everything goes right. It's just everything is going to have to go a little more right for them than it would for the best teams in the league. But coming in at number 4 for me, at the bottom of the A tier, it's going to be LNG Esports. And I think this team is really interesting to talk about because, again, very similar to kind of what we talked about with Weibo, this team really isn't all that different going into 2024. They've got a different jungler, they've got a different support, but as I've talked about in my offseason grades video, talent-wise, it's basically the same thing here, and you might not even have a different support, which we will definitely talk about, but, talent-wise, I think both of these players are side grades. It's a bit of a mentality change in terms of maybe the aggressiveness with what you might want to play the game with, but at the end of the day, I still think this LNG team is going to be relatively relatively good, and that's why I have them in the top 4. Their lineup is looking like Zika in the top lane, Weiwei in the jungle, Scout in the mid lane, Gala at AD carry, and I believe it's going to be Mark at support. Hong is still on the roster. He played a bit during Demacia Cup, but so did Mark. It's definitely going to be interesting to see which direction they want to go in. Gala has wanted to play with Mark for quite a while, and Mark's been a pretty good support at this level, but I would say that Hong is probably a little better in terms of the support position, so, you know, it's certainly interesting. As I talked about in my grades video, the big difference that you're getting out of the two, and the reason I'm talking about both of them is because I think both of them are going to play, or I don't know which one is going to play the most over the course of the spring split, but the big difference in both of them is their mentalities. Hong is a lot more of a player who's willing to play within structure, not really a player who's going to look to, like, make these crazy roams, or a player who's going to look to dominate the 2v2, just somebody who I think is going to allow the rest of the team to really be their best. Hong has been on some really good teams, and there's a reason for that. It's because he really does enable the rest of his players to look a lot better on his team. Mark is not necessarily that. He's a lot more aggressive as a support. I would argue he is one of the most aggressive supports in the world. It's why he has worked so well with Jackie Love over the last few years on top esports. I think that's what they're looking more for, because you're also bringing Weiwei into the jungle, who's a lot more aggressive of a support, or a jungler, I should say, which I will talk about in just a second, but I assume it's going to be Mark here. I don't think you bring Mark in to be a backup, and so I would expect him to be the starting support, but if Hong is here, the ranking really doesn't change all that much. It's still going to be right around number 7 for me, and, you know, not a problem, but certainly not someone that I think is, like, top of their position in their role. And then Weiwei is the new jungler as well. He is the other new player coming in here to LNG. Weiwei's a player that I'm definitely lower on than I think consensus is. He comes in as my number 7 jungler. I'm just not high on Weiwei as an individual player. Obviously, I think he's good, and he made World Finals this past year for a reason. He was pretty good in that run, but he was also, in my opinion, the weakest player on Weibo Gaming at Worlds. He was certainly very bad in the Swiss stage. He almost cost that team even being able to get out of Swiss in the first place, because he was losing jungle matchups against teams that he really should not have been losing to. And then once they got into the bracket stage, he was a bit better. He was pretty good in World Finals, probably the best player on the team individually in World Finals, but it didn't really matter. He was actually kind of a problem for the team in the regular season as well. Again, not that he was bad, just that he wasn't elite. He wasn't winning games. He wasn't, you know, winning early super consistently against the best junglers in the league. He was just kind of an okay jungler, and I think that's what you're getting here on LNG. Tarzan certainly wasn't dominant last year, but I wouldn't expect Weiwei to come in and just immediately change the fortunes of what this team got. Like I said, I see this more as a side grade rather than an upgrade or a downgrade in the jungle. Rather, you're going from a player in Tarzan who's very good at a lot of these tankier, engaged junglers, things like the Zac and the Sejuani that he's super well known for, to Weiwei, who does want to carry a bit more, does want a bit more resources, and I don't know how that's going to fit into this team. It's certainly going to be interesting, but that's the direction they wanted to go, and that's why I assume it will also be Mark starting here. But the other 3 members are returning. Zika coming back in the top lane. He was pretty solid last year. A lot better than I thought he was going to be. He was the player that I was a bit concerned about from Invictus moving on to one of the top teams, just because I didn't really know if he had the talent to be able to keep up with other top laners isolated in the 1v1, but he was an all-pro in spring, was really, really good that split when LNG, you know, really needed top side to win because they had LP on the bottom side, and they just didn't feel comfortable being able to play through that, and I think he earned that. But once Gala came in, his role went down considerably. I don't think his talent went down. I just think that, you know, he wasn't asked to do nearly as much in the summer split, rightfully so. They played a lot through bot lane, but, you know, he's a solid player. Going to be a good weak side top laner. I'm not sold on him being, like, the best top laner in the league, but he comes in right below a player like Breathe. I mean, that's pretty good company, in my opinion. Number 6 is certainly not a slight in the LPL. And then you've got the 2 carries. The reason that this team is sitting here at number 4 in the top 4. You've got Scout, you've got Gala. Scout was the MVP in both splits last year, and it was for a good reason. He was the most valuable player to his team in both summer and in spring of 2023. It was the best split of his career, and this guy's a former world champion. That should tell you just how good he was in 2023. He was one of the most dominant players regardless of position. Coming in at number 2 in mid lane rankings in the LPL is not easy. He is above some really damn good players, and, you know, I think he deserves it. I think you could even make the argument he should be at number 1. He's not for me, but he's pretty darn close. I mean, he's about as good of a mid laner as you could ask for. Somebody who's more notoriously been resource heavy. He likes to play some of these scalers into the late game. Obviously, you know, picks like Azir and Orianna come to mind, but he is more flexible than that. He can play whatever you need him to play. He can be aggressive in the early game. That's kind of really what led him to dominate, is he was a really good laner last year. So, you know, I don't really see a weakness in Scout's game, and I would expect him to continue to be very good. Maybe not quite as good as last year because that's just almost an impossible bar to reach, but I mean, he's one of the top 5 players in the world right now going into 2024, and I just don't really see another way of looking at it. And then you've got Gala in the AD carry position. Talk about a great secondary carry. He's not even your main guy on this team, but bringing Gala in the summer split is what completely turned this team around. They got better over the course of the year because Gala got more integrated in the team dynamic, and honestly, he's amazing. I know I say this every single time, but he is the pinnacle of what I consider a really good, a borderline great elite level AD carry to be. He's not going to dominate lane in the same way that the best will, but he's one of the best in the world, and he's like an A- in everything, right? He's a jack of all trades, kind of master of them all, right? He's just not the best at everything. He's just very good at everything, which makes him one of the best in the world, if that makes sense. Very well-rounded player. I really trust him in high pressure, high leverage situations, and he knows what it's like to be a primary carry for a team. And so if things start going wrong, if jungle's not as good as people think it is, if scout regresses a bit, or maybe, jungle mate isn't quite as synergistic as you would like it to be, maybe Zika isn't getting resources, Gala can be your primary carry on this team, and you can still win games. They've got a pretty solid backup plan just in case, but this team is really stacked. I know that, maybe they're not quite as top-heavy as the 3 teams that I have listed above them, and I would agree with that. I think Scout and Gala are doing a bulk of the work as to why LNG is in the top 4, but a duo of Scout and Gala just can't be anywhere else. They are the 2, most interesting, carries as a duo in the LPL, or at least they're up there for that conversation. I'm really excited to see what they can do with another full year together because they were already so good in half a year, and with this team potentially becoming even more aggro in the early game, we could see some real big bangers out of LNG in 2024. And now we get to move on to the top 3 teams here, and this is going to be the top of my A tier. Both of the teams in the top 2 are considered S tier by me, which we will get into, but coming in at the top of A tier, which of course, teams that I think really have a chance to contend for, a championship, even in the spring split, just maybe they aren't favorites going into it. Coming in at number 3, it is going to be Top Esports. I just really like this roster. I've gotten burned by this team so many times on this channel because it feels like I rank them so high every single year. It feels like every year it's like, this is the year TES finally figures it out. This is the year that they go to Worlds and they actually live up to expectations at Worlds. And, well, I'm not saying that that's going to happen this year. They're not number 1 or number 2 for a reason. They're still in the A tier. I think this is really, really, really good for them. I think this is an amazing team, a really good offseason. They have upside. They have a great floor. They brought in the right players, in my opinion, and I'm really excited to see what their 2024 is going to look like. Their roster is looking like 369 in the top lane, Tion in the jungle, Cream in the mid lane, Jackie Love at AD carry, and Mako at support. It's 4 really proven talents, or I should say it's really like, I don't know, 1 really proven talent, 3 probably very proven talents, and then 1 talent that's like, this is the year for you, bud. Like, you got to figure it out now. So I'm really excited to see it. I'm really excited to see what they look like because, man, is this team aggressive. Man, do I think it's going to be fast-paced and fun to watch. But it's not like they're perfect. They do have more concerns than either of the top 2 teams, in my opinion, which is why they're here at number 3. Let's talk about the 2 players that are returning. My pick for the Summer Split MVP in the LPL last year in Jackie Love is returning to this roster. That really caused some controversy. I really wasn't expecting that. I really didn't expect him to not be liked by the community as much as I liked him. To me, he was clearly the most valuable player to his individual team in the LPL. I love Scout. I think it was the right choice. He was a fine selection in that same vein, but I thought Jackie was amazing. And for him to get 3rd team All-Pro, like, that's crazy to me. There were not 2 better AD carries in the LPL last year. And from a regular season perspective, obviously, players like Elk, players like Ruler, they were better, in the long term, even a player like Gala, they were better in the playoffs, but from a regular season perspective, Jackie was amazing, and this is just who Jackie Love is. One of the things that really impressed me last year is that, the reputation Jackie Love has is that he's going to flip games, he's going to, get leads, and then he's going to be too aggressive, he's going to position too far forward. Sometimes that really aggressive positioning is going to get him a quadra kill, sometimes he's going to die first in a fight, and you never really know which version of Jackie Love you're going to get. We got a more controlled, dare I say, contained style of Jackie Love last year. Not that he was any less aggressive, but rather I think that he understands his limits incredibly well now, and he really didn't have those bad games. He really didn't mess up all that much in 2023. Just was a super good ADC. He's coming in as my number 2 AD carry in the LPL. Spoiler alert, that's above Elk, that's above Gala, that's above these players that I think a lot of other people would say are, better than Jackie Love. I just don't think so. I think Jackie Love really is that good. And I think if he were on Bilibili or if he were on LGD Gaming, people would recognize it more. But Top Esports was kind of a disaster last year in a lot of different ways. A couple of players really underperformed, and so I really expect JackeyLove to continue his success. He's one of the best AD carries in the world, certainly one of the most talented, and I rate him very highly because of it. The other player coming back is Tion, and man, has my opinion really flipped on Tion, and it's basically the opposite of what public opinion is. He was the MVP in 2022 summer, and I was sitting there on this channel. We covered every game, and I was like, I don't know how you can watch top esports in 2022 and say that Tion is the one carrying them when Knight was winning so many games through his pressure in the mid lane and being able to use that to win Tion jungle matchups basically on his own, and I was very confused. Tion was still good, but I was shocked that he was an MVP caliber player, and then he had a bad Worlds, and I wasn't surprised because I didn't think his form leading up to that tournament was all that different from what he showed at that tournament. But then 2023 happens, and everybody's shitting on Tion. Everybody's talking about how he's the weakness of the team, and I'm sitting there like, this is the best Tion has been in years. He was playing really well last year, did a great job facilitating bot lane in particular. Like I said, JackeyLove was really good, but a lot of that was Tion just giving him so many resources over the course of the season. Was really impressed with what he was able to do. In my opinion, clearly the two best players on this team, at least in terms of performance last year, came back in Tion and JackeyLove. I think it's really good to have them both on roster. Tion comes in as my number 4 jungler, which is really high considering just how good jungle is in the LPL, but Tion's an amazing player and they're happy to have him. And then, 3 new players. Like I said, one of them very stable. That stable player to me is 369 in the top lane. I get it, there's a meme. Sometimes you roll 3, sometimes you roll 9, but he rolls 9 a lot more than he rolls 3. That is absolutely the case. He's played for this org before. This is a big kind of homecoming reunion for him, very similar to what I talked about with Rookie on Ninjas in Pyjamas. It really felt like he wanted to come back to this organization. He wanted to play here again, and I think that's going to help out a lot. 369 has been dominant the past couple of years. He was a mega carry for JD Gaming in 2022 when that team really broke out, when they made semifinals. You could argue he was the best player on that team that year. I think Higao and Kanavi obviously were a little above him, but 369 was pretty darn good. And then last year, he was everything that super team could have asked for, and then some. He never was asked to be the primary carry, but even still, he was dominating 1v1 matchups, was the perfect weak side top laner. I mean, he was one of the most valuable players in the entire world for his role. And for him to come back here to top esports, for a player who can do everything, like, yes, this is an amazing pickup. He's a top 3 top laner in the world. You could argue that he's top 2. It really just comes down to, like, consistency, because his consistency is crazy high. He's the number 2 top laner for me in the LPL. An amazing signing, an amazing pickup here for top esports, and a big reason why I'm so in on this team is you can have 369 be that more, weak side, top side, just kind of non-high resource player up in the top lane, and you can put pressure into JackeyLove, and you can put pressure into Cream here in the mid lane. And, Cream comes in as my lowest ranked player. He comes in as my number 10 mid laner. Again, I want to reiterate, mid lane is so stacked. If you think 10 is too low, I do as well. I think he should be better than this, but pick a mid laner that I put above him that you think is worse than him, guaranteed, or was worse than him last year. I just can't do that. Cream was one of the first ever channel darlings. Him and Zeka were really the first 2 channel darlings on this channel, but I think Cream was first. I think when you really think about, like, the players that I went to bat for, the players that I was really saying, like, these are my guys, Cream was first on this channel when I first started doing these weekly reviews, and ever since then, I've been a huge fan of OMG. I've really been pushing for Cream, and, I don't know if he's taken that next leap, that, and I hope you can trust me saying that because I really wanted him to. That was all to say that I have all the reason in the world to say that Cream is going to be this magnificent, fantastic mid laner because I put a lot of my channel's reputation on Cream in the past, but I just don't know if he is that guy. I think he was the weakest member of OMG in 2023, that team that did really well. They kind of ignored him for a bit. The top side was really good. Shanji and Aki were winning, consistently isolated in their matchups, and Abel was carrying a lot of the late games. Cream didn't really have to do all that much last year, and now he's asked to be a really pivotal player on a team that wants to win the LPL, a team that not only wants to go to Worlds, but expects to go to Worlds. This is going to be a very pivotal year for Cream as a player, a very aggressive player, kind of gets memed a bit for his quote-unquote small champion pool, but as I always say on this channel, you cannot criticize a player for a small champion pool if you cannot ban them out. If you can't ban them out, then it doesn't matter. It's not small enough for it to matter. He's got 6 or 7 champions that he's really good at. Yes, the Akali and the Sylas and things like that. Is he better on those? Yes, he's better on these melee assassins in the mid lane, but he can play Azir. He can play it well. He can play Orianna. We've seen him play control mages. We know he can scale into the late game. He's a better player than people give him credit for right now, and a more versatile player, but I just don't know if this is the fit. I think a lot of pressure on this team is generally going to go to bot lane, and Cream's going to have to play on his own for a bit. It's going to be big for him to see if he can step up and become that elite mid laner that I said he was going to be when he was so young. This is the year to prove it. This is the year that he can prove that he has it in him. I'm really excited to see what he can do. And then Mako coming in at the support position. He ranks surprisingly low for me, if only because 2023 was kind of a bad year for him. Summer was not really the Mako that we all know. I chalk a lot of that up, and I talked about this a lot in my weekly reviews last year, to the fact that Uzi and Mako just clearly were not on the same page for a lot of last year for EDG. It really felt like those two in particular were contrasting styles. Mako seemed to not talk all that much in the summer split, and that's certainly not the Mako we've grown to love. He is one of the most talkative, one of the best shot callers in the world, and so to see him kind of take a passive, more backseat role on that EDG team, I think definitely messed with his confidence. A lot of people were memeing him on Reddit. I was not one of them. I was defending Mako for a lot of last year. I think he's going to have a great year here for Top Esports, but I have to acknowledge that last year was not his best year. I just think him and Jackie Love are going to bounce back in an incredible way. This is going to be one of my favorite bot lanes in the entire world in 2024. I have a really high feeling that that's just going to be the case, and I'm super excited to see what he can offer, but man, this Top Esports team is fun. I love Tian and Jackie Love coming back. 369 is just about the best signing in the top lane you could have possibly gotten. Mako is one of the most decorated, supports of all time. I think my pick and a lot of other people's pick for the greatest support ever. And you've got a young player in the mid lane that this is the year that you're kind of expecting him to break out. This could be a championship winning team, an LPL winning team if everything goes right. I could also see a world in which maybe Cream isn't as good as we're hoping. Maybe Tian takes a step back. Maybe Jackie Love and Mako don't end up working out. It's possible, right? I just think it's significantly less likely, which to me is why this team comes in at the top of A tier. I have a lot of faith and confidence in Top Esports, but again, like I said earlier, not the first time I've said that. And now we get to move on to our top two teams, and this is really the make or break of the LPL because we're moving from the A tier into the S tier. What S tier means in the LPL, in a region like the LPL, these are teams that truly believe that they should be winning worlds in 2024. Like, that's the goal for every team that we mentioned in the S tier. It was the goal in the S tier in the LCK when I talked about T1 and Gen G. It's the goal here in the S tier for LPL. If these teams do not win the LPL or do not, do really well at Worlds, semifinals or finals, like, that's a disappointment for them. Like, that is, what the goal is for teams of this caliber. And coming in at number 2 for me, just under, it's going to be JD Gaming. Last year's, master team, last year's super team, whatever you want to say, they've made some changes moving into 2024, and for me, it just pushes them down a slight bit. It really isn't by a lot, but just slight enough because of the question marks that this team has for them to come in at number 2 in these rankings. But man, this team is still ridiculously stacked. You could argue that this is still a super team. I understand that they have one pretty major question mark, but if that question mark is even remotely answerable, then this is still going to be one of the best teams in the entire world. Absolutely no doubt. Their lineup is looking like Sheer in the top lane, Kanavi in the jungle, Yagao in the mid lane, Ruler at AD carry, and Missing at support. Of course, 3 members coming back from that super team last year. The bot lane of Ruler and Missing and Kanavi, and all 3 of them are going to be listed as the number 1 players in their position in the LPL. I don't think it's really debatable for 2 of them, in my opinion. Ruler, I just don't think the conversation is there. He has proven himself that he is the best AD carry in the world right now, and he has been that for quite a long time. I said that in 2022 about him. I said that in 2021 about him. I think Ruler has been this guy for longer than people like to admit. In my opinion, for my money, I've said this before on the channel, Ruler is the greatest AD carry of all time because he just does things that other AD carries aren't able to do. Is the winning always there? Maybe not. I mean, he's won Worlds. Like, that's pretty darn good. That's more than a lot of other of the top AD carries that people list in these conversations, but he's only won Worlds once, and I understand that you're kind of waiting for him to get back there after it being 2017, a long time ago, but Ruler's performances have only gotten better since then. I think he's playing the best league he has ever played right now, and to me, he is the best AD carry in the world. For this team to be able to bring him back, obviously, it was a no-brainer if they wanted to. There were rumors that they were, he was moving around somewhere in the offseason, that he might have wanted to play with other, big players on a different organization. Maybe he goes back to Korea, maybe he stays in the LPL but goes to a different team. In the end, he stays here on JD Gaming, and I think it's a match made in heaven for both of these, both player and team, both of the parties involved. Ruler is perfect here, and he is a perfect AD carry for them to try to win Worlds with. And then you've got his partner, Missing. Now, Missing, it took a little bit for him to get here, but he is the number 1 support, in my opinion, in the LPL. I think this is the one that's more, talk aboutable. I don't think Kanavi is really, up in the air. I don't think Ruler's up in the air. It really depends on how you feel about On, who we will talk about in the next segment, in my opinion. But Missing is a very consistent player, and that's why he gets that #1 spot for me. Maybe his highs aren't as high as On. I think On was more impressive as a player in 2023 with what he was able to do with that team, but Missing just does everything he's asked to do at an incredibly high level. To me, there just isn't a support that I would rather have on a super team than Missing. He plays Enchanters incredibly well. That's really what he made his name on, but he's still incredibly good on Engagers. Just a very versatile, consistent, solid support. One of the best in the entire world, and that's not up for debate. Kanavi, to me, is the best jungler in the world as well. You're bringing him back here. This was also a pretty big coup, as I talked about in my offseason video. There were rumors for a long time that he was going to be the starting jungler for Gen G in 2024, so for them to be able to bring him back, to retain him here, that's massive, because he is just built for modern League of Legends more than any other jungler that I've ever seen, because what he does at such a high level, what makes him so unstoppable, is that he is the best early game jungler of all time. You can talk about other junglers that, are really elite. Like Bengi was amazing at being able to facilitate the rest of his team and allowing his teammates to do their best work. Canyon is an incredible carry jungler, really great in team fights, somebody who you can give resources to and just, let him carry you. You'll be on the back of until you win the game. But Kanavi just decimates people so quickly, and it is absolutely absurd. I've never seen somebody who can just perfectly path every single game like Kanavi, who can dominate early matchups, who knows exactly how to play every single interaction in the game. It's just miraculous how good Kanavi is at jungle. Now, is he the best team fighter in the world? Probably not. Like, he's not the best team fighting jungle player in the world, but his games so rarely get to a point where he even has to deal with that I understand why maybe he's a little out of practice in terms of being able to team fight, as well as every other jungler in the world. It's just his games end so fast. It's so ridiculous how good he is, and he has been that way for a long time. He was the best jungler in the world in 2020. Took a little bit of a year off in 2021, but we don't talk about that. Was great again in 2022, was even better in 2023, and I think he's going to continue that in 2024. But all three of those players, I think all deserve that #1 spot, and it's really hard for me to argue anybody else in those positions. And then you're making a mid lane move. You're swapping mid laners with Bilibili Gaming. Yagao is coming in. Knight is leaving. This is certainly a change, at least for me. They're very different players, and it's why I talked about in my offseason grades video why it's not necessarily fair to compare the quote-unquote skill level of these two players, because I think they're very different players, and they offer very different things. Knight is a very resource-heavy, very carry-oriented mid laner, somebody who you can rely on to be a focal point of your team, whereas Yagao here on JD Gaming is somebody that is probably the best facilitating mid in the entire world. If you're an LEC fan or an LCS fan, think of somebody like Niski. That's Yagao, but like it's Niski on steroids, right? He's the best version of that player, where he just makes everybody, especially junglers that he plays with, look a lot better. Now, it took a bit of time for him to get going in 2023, but once he got going, he was just as good as he was in previous years, and he was a top 10 player in the world for me going into Worlds in 2022 when he played for this organization. This was the org he came up on. This was the org he made his name on. So for him to come back, for him and Kanavi to get back together, they had phenomenal synergy the last time these two played. Yagao could be the best mid laner in the LPL, and I really wouldn't be all that surprised in terms of the output that he gives in 2024. I rank him #3, if only because from an individual value perspective, I just value a couple of the other players that are above him a little more, like I said, individually, but, Scout and Knight are very good players, but Yagao is close, and he's just a different style from those two, and I think he will perform up to that level this year. But really the big question mark for this team, it's Sheer in the top lane. Like, there really is no other way to put it. It seems like Sheer is going to be their starting top laner. They do have Flandre. If I'm wrong, and if Flandre is the starting top laner, this is probably #1 instead of #2. Actually, I don't know, man. #1's really freaking good, but it's a lot closer. It becomes much more of a conversation. But if it is going to be Sheer, that is a question mark, because I've only seen a couple of games from Sheer in his entire life, and they were all in Demacia Cup this year, where this team didn't play. I mean, it was mostly, I'm not mostly backup. Sheer was in the lineup. Kanavi was not there, though. And that's a big part of your team. I mean, Kanavi's basically the entire early game identity of JD Gaming. For Maggie to be there, Maggie was good. I certainly don't want to take anything away from Maggie, but, Yagao, Ruler, and Missing were good enough to be able to win. Sheer had a couple of really good games, which excites me. Obviously, the mechanical talent is there. They would not have made this move if they didn't genuinely feel like he could be better than 369 this year, which is a big ask, but, I mean, it's just hard for me to say that he's definitely going going to be that. He's never even played a game at a lower level of competition. This is somebody who skipped every bit. He's gone from solo queue to being on JD Gaming and trying to win worlds. Like, that is the pipeline for Sheer, and it's a lot to ask for a player like that, which is why he comes in at number 17, dead last in my top lane rankings to start the year, because he's never played competitively. The only tournament he has ever been in was Demacia Cup, and so it's really hard to know what you're going to get from him, but that team still went to the finals of Demacia Cup, even without Kanavi and with Sheer in the top lane, and so I'd like to believe that it's going to be fine for them, and if it's Flandre here again, I don't even feel nearly as much of a worry about that. Flandre is an incredibly solid top laner, a good carry player, but if Sheer has the upside that clearly they think he has because they're giving him this job, then this could be one of the scarier teams in the entire world. Again, they were a super team last year, and maybe they're not as proven, maybe they're not as guaranteed to be a super team in 2024, but this is still one of the scariest rosters. Kanavi Ruler missing is still arguably the best trio in League of Legends, and if this team ended up winning Worlds, even after everything I've said here, I'm not going to be surprised even a little bit. And that's going to bring us to number 1 in these rankings, the team that I predict to be the best team in the LPL in 2024, the team I really believe in, coming in at the top of S tier. It is going to be Bilibili Gaming. I have them at number 1, and I know that's going to surprise some people because this team just couldn't get over the JD Gaming hump last year. They lost in Spring Finals to JDG. They lost at MSI Finals to JDG. They lost in Summer to JDG in the Winners Finals. You know, they didn't make Summer Finals, but you know, they just couldn't get over the hump. They lost every single time in the regular season. They lost one series in the regular season last year. Guess who it was to? JD Gaming. But I think this is the year. I think with JDG going in a different direction in the top lane, I think with Knight coming over here into the mid lane, I think this is the year Bilibili finally gets over the hump, and they are my pick for the 2024 Spring Split LPL champions. And I don't know how common or popular that opinion is, but they just won Demacia Cup, and that really only, you know, further bolstered my opinion. They were number 1 before Demacia Cup, as you can see in the trending tab. I had them number 1 since they signed Knight, just because I think this team is ridiculous. But let's go ahead and talk about why I have them at number 1. Their lineup is looking like Bin in the top lane, Shun in the jungle, Knight and in the mid lane, LGD carry, and On at support. It's just about as good as it gets, man. It's an A tier player in basically every role. There's only one player that I have here that's considered a B, and that's Shun in the jungle, but he's still the second best jungler in the league for me. But you've got a ridiculous amount of talent. Let's start with Bin in the top lane. He comes in as my number 1 top laner, not only in the LPL, but in the world going into 2024. To me, there is just no top laner that carries in the same way that Bin carries. He changes a game simply by existing in it. His ability to dominate in the mid to late game is second to absolutely none, and his laning is still ridiculously good. He still dominates people 1v1. His stats have proven that over the course of his entire career, but you just watch this guy eye test wise, and you have to know where he is every single time that you play in the late game. Like, if you're taking a team fight, you simply have to be able to track him, or else you are going to lose that team fight. That's the kind of difference maker that Bin is, and that's why, to me, he's the number 1 top laner in the world. I received a bit of pushback for that because I put Zeus at 2 and not at number 1, but to me, Bin is a better player than Zeus, or at least more consistent. He's been the better player for longer, even if they're relatively similar in terms of output. In the recent weeks, in the recent years, you know, at Worlds last year, to me, Bin is the player that I would, you know, put more stock in guaranteeing being good going into 2024. And then, like I said, you've got June returning here in the jungle. What a pickup for this team last year. Plucked him off of Invictus when that team really wasn't doing well. I was a big fan of June on Invictus, but I was concerned that he wasn't going to adapt to being on Bilibili all that quickly. And honestly, that was true. Him and Yagao did not have synergy for Spring Split. They were barely a good team in Spring. Obviously, they figured it out and they got to finals. But go back to the regular season. People forget, I made videos all throughout the Spring regular season. This was not some sort of dominant team in the Spring regular season. This was just a good team that you were kind of, you know, seeing if they could figure it out. And June and Yagao eventually got on the same page and they never looked back, but it took a bit for Shun to get, you know, going. But once he got going, that talent absolutely went through. He's a player who could be one of the best junglers in the entire world. He might already be one of the best junglers in the entire world. I just need him to clean up some of the over-aggressive errors that he has in the jungle. We were talking about a player in Kanavi who knows how to control the early game better than any other jungler. June is also very good in the early game, but he does sometimes run into problems of being too over-aggressive, throwing a lead that he may have, or just generally not knowing matchups objectives nearly as well. It's okay. It's something that I think he will get better with in time as he plays for more top-tier teams. It's something he absolutely got better with over the course of last year, but I'm expecting to see even more improvement going into this year. I think there's a real shot for him to be the MVP of the LPL if everything goes right here. And then you've got Elkin On in the bot lane, the other two members returning. I'm not going to pat myself on the back. I do every single video on Elkin On, but truly, these guys were off of everybody's radar for top-tier teams. I know people knew about Elk. I know people knew about On, but I don't think there was an analyst that liked either of them more than I did. I was singing Elk's praises on Ultra Prime. He was so good on WE, before he went over, but he was the solo carry on that Ultra Prime team and was just hard elo stuck. He comes over here to Bilibili. He gets to play that aggressive style with a very aggressive support, and it really, really works out. He's the most aggressive AD carry in the world. People talk about Jackie Love as being that AD carry that's going to flip games because of his positioning, that you're either going to get Jackie Love or crappy Love. It really is Elk. It's more, Elk fits that description, I think, a bit better now. He's going to have those games where he's just really bad, especially in lane. He's typically better in team fights, but he's going to have some laning phases where he's just way too far forward, allowing himself to be taken advantage of, and I think that could be a bigger problem now that the map has changed, but the good heavily outweighs the bad. I mean, significantly outweighs the bad. Like I said, top 4 for me in terms of AD carries is all one big blob. Whatever order you want to put Ruler, Jackie Love, Elk, Gala, whatever order you want to put those 4 in, honestly, I'll probably agree with you. They're all incredibly good players, but Elk for me, just because of the inconsistency, does come in at the bottom of that list. But again, on any given day, he could be the number 1 AD carry in the LPL, and he could be the number 1 AD carry in the world. That's his peak. That's the top of what his range ends up looking like. And then he gets to play with On, who was even more of a channel darling. As much as I liked Elk, I went on rants, tangents on this channel. People were annoyed with me talking about how much I liked On as a player when he was on Weibo. People were upset that when Sword Art came back to the LPL, he was not starting immediately for Suning for Weibo because, On was in the way, and Sword Art's this very famous player, and even though he was coming off a bad split on TSM, there was still a lot of hype surrounding him, but On was the better player, and I was saying that from day one, and man, was he amazing for this team last year. He's the only other support I think you could consider putting number 1 in the LPL. It's him and Missing as 1A, 1B. He's going to have a few more bad games. Again, he's a bit more inconsistent in the bot lane because of that feast or famine play style, but it is mostly feast. He is the best playmaker in the world from the support position right now. Keria and Lehens are kind of up there, and Missing's a very good playmaker as well, but I don't know, man. On just does it in different ways. That he makes plays that no other support in the world makes, but he also has games that are worse than all of those other players. And so for me, he does come in at number 2, but again, very similar to Elk, on any given day, he could be the number 1 support in the entire world. And these two together make one of the most volatile and one of the highest ceiling bot lanes that I've ever seen in League of Legends. When they're on, like when both of them are playing well, they're genuinely unstoppable. There is no one in the world that can beat them. And then you bring Knight into the mid lane. It's a bit different than having Yagao here. Yagao, obviously, we talked about it, much more of a supportive, facilitating mid. Remind you of a player like a Niski. Knight is not that. Knight is a carry. Knight is the most talented player in the world. It's between him and Chovy. I don't really care which one you want to end up picking. They are the 2 highest mechanical ceilings in the world, but I would pick Knight. I think Knight really is that guy in the LPL, and I know people like to talk about, oh, he hasn't won anything, but I went on this massive rant in my offseason video. I'm not going to do it again here because I know people are tired of it, but I went on this massive rant in my offseason video where I talked about how, I don't know, man, LPL Spring Finals MVP, MSI Finals MVP, LPL Summer Finals MVP, and World Semifinalist is a pretty good resume for 1 year, right? With him being the best player on that team for a lot of that year. I mean, he's really good. He is, in my opinion, the best player in the world. And I know people don't want to hear that, but to me, he is the best player in the world. And so for Bilibili to be this roster that was really good, but just couldn't quite get over the hump last year, for them to bring in what is, in my opinion, the best player in the world in the mid lane, that's ridiculous. The only thing that can stop this team is too many cooks. Bin is a high-resource top laner. Elk and On are a high-resource bot lane. June can be a high-resource jungle, but I think all of these players have more versatility and flexibility to their styles than they get credit for, specifically June and Knight, who I think are both better facilitators than anybody ever talks about. I think this team is going to be so fun to watch, and from a talent perspective, you could make the argument that this is the most talented team in the world. I'm going out on a limb here, but to me, the favorites to win the 2024 Spring Split and to be the best team in the LPL are Bilibili Gaming. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL 2024 Spring Split Primer and Power Rankings video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed. This is the final primer video of the spring-winter split of the January season here. We've done all 4 of the major regions, as well as the NACL on this channel. Again, go check out those other videos if you are interested, if you haven't seen them yet, but I really do appreciate you guys checking them out. It's time for weekly review content. Obviously, we're not done covering the LPL. We cover it every single week on this channel, just as we do the other 3 major regions and the NACL, and so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, if you're interested to see how my opinions might change, or how I get to these conclusions and, you know, get ready for the summer split as well, then hit subscribe, hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos go live, but also leave a like on this. It really does mean a lot. We put so much time and effort into making these primer videos, obviously not only filming them and recording them and doing all that, but I don't only watch tape on the rookies. I don't only go and watch tape on the people that I didn't see last year. I go and rewatch tape on every single team and every player that I talk about to make sure that I'm giving you guys the best analysis that I can possibly give. And so if you did enjoy it, it really would mean a lot to me if you hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. So with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.